What's the Church of Scientology so afraid of?
This is SPTV.
Welcome back, everybody, for more SPTV, where every day is a great day not to be in a cult. We are here for the showdown of the century. I hope you guys are ready because it is going to get bloody. Okay. All right. I'm joined today by Jason HORVATIC. How are you doing?
Good, mate. Doing good.
Thank you for jojoining me.
I wanted the AA Ron clip. Why didn't we get the AA Ron clip?
I know. I should have done the AA Ron clip. Actually, here we go. Y'all ready? Y'all ready?
Balake.
Yeah.
Where is Balake at?
My name's Blake.
Do you want to go to war, Balake? I'm for real. AA Ron.
AA Ron is present, everyone.
I feel I've arrived now. That's good.
Okay, let's just tell everyone real quick. Jason, you're a former Scientologist. You were in the Sea Org for a little bit as well. You're from Australia, right?
I'm in Australia. I'm in Perth, Australia right now.
Perth, Australia. And you're in your final year of university working on a BA?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Now, you came to my attention because I saw you on Twitter. People were tagging me on Twitter. I don't know if it was you or someone else wanting to debate some Scientology things. And I would, just for context, so I messaged you on Twitter DMs, hey, what would you like to debate? Now, by the way, when we were having this message, I didn't realize you were a former Scientologist. I thought you were just an academic who decided that us former Scientologists weren't very good at speaking about our experience, and you wanted to bring some culture to the conversation. Okay, so you go, hi, Aaron. My angle is to discuss Scientology itself as opposed to the Church of Scientology and its associated figures. I don't feel Scientology itself is being discussed, and I feel that makes it harder for friends and family of Scientologists, as well as Scientologists poking their heads out of Scientology, to analyze their ideas and think them over critically. We could discuss, debate any big topic regarding Scientology itself that you like, from is Scientology religion, to is Hubbard a philosopher, to can Scientology survive in the modern times? Okay, so let me ask you this. What, generally speaking, what do you feel is missing or lacking from the discourse that you've seen publicly on Scientology?
Analysis of the basic concepts and giving them a fair go. So, for example, you could take okay, well, so I'm a major in linguistics, so you could take the word,
Not plugged in this whole time. So anyway.
Okay, that does sound better. Yeah.
A little bit. Hey, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's right. So I'm a linguistics major, so you could discuss HOB clearing words and go through the merits and demerits of such an approach instead of just going like it's garbage and I hate it. And when we do that, I think, I've heard this phrase, the bubble, the Scientology bubble. I've heard Mike Rinder use it, and I think you've spoken about it as well, and others. I feel that bubble then gets created from both sides because it acts as a straw man for Scientologists. And I went through this. I came out in late 2017, so it's fairly recent in the grand scheme of things. And I tried to listen to some of this. Admittedly, you weren't around then, with your channel like this, but or were you? Maybe you were. But anyway, I didn't, for whatever reason, I didn't pick up on you. I watched the Aftermath. I watched Glowing Clear. I listened to all of Leah and Mike's podcasts. I listened to some Chris Sheldon, John Atack, those sorts of figures, and they consistently let their frustrations get the better of them, and then it allowed me, and then they engage in a straw man of the basic ideas, and it allowed me to sort of go, like you can then fall prey to the church's propaganda and go, well, Leah Remini's a liar. And I go, oh, yes, she did say that all Scientologists have to study for 2.5 hours a day. That is a lie because I never fucking did that in my entire life. And I was a Scientologist until I was 31 years of age. So then I remain a Scientologist. I don't engage. So I really would like to see the bubble turn into more of like a boulevard. Like let's let people cross it with some more nuance.
So I'll tell you, I mean, when I read when we were messaging back and forth in Twitter, I couldn't help but think, in response to the arguments or the statements or examples that you were given, I just couldn't help but keep asking myself, have you ever watched any of my videos?
So after I tweeted you, I started watching some of your videos because I thought, fuck, I better watch some of Aaron because, I might be talking out my ass and maybe Aaron's already doing the good work. Look, yeah, your content is the best I've seen. I watched that documentary you guys did yesterday. Tough act to follow for someone like me. Jesus, and the black screen text explaining what the RPF was or ethics or whatever, they were all really good. They were spot on. They weren't straw manning at all. It was a really fair go. I would say though that having a channel called SPTV might not attract. So it's a great name, but you know what I mean. Like it might not attract Scientologists to it.
But you'll notice the name of the channel isn't SPTV. The name of the channel is Growing Up in Scientology.
Fair enough. Also, the use of the X word, the confidential information from OT3.
Xenu.
Right. That is going to push. Like, so there's a book. This is an academic book. It's a bit fancy. It's called Among the Scientologists. It's 2018. It's an academic. He got permission to do sociological studies in the church, and he estimated that.
Who wrote that?
Academic called Donald A. Westbrook. And to give you an idea of how snooty it is, it's called Among the Scientologists: History, Theology, and Praxis, which is a very fancy word for practices. So it's one of those books. And
was that? I'm sorry to keep interrupting you. Is that a book that was written with the cooperation of Scientology?
Yeah. This is his PhD thesis.
Then he's a fraud. He's a piece of shit. That's no good.
Well, okay, yes and no. His position was like, well, let's take it from their perspective. So in academic work, you can take it from the Scientologist perspective. Then you have other academics who take it from the anti-Scientology perspective. You have academics who take it from a neutral perspective. Like it's okay to do that sort of work. And he does acknowledge that. He's like, I understand that this is from a very biased perspective.
How is it even any better than just having Scientology write the book?
Well, he's been trained in sociology, a bit of philosophy, religious studies, and so on. So he's explaining it from an external perspective.
Did Scientology have final approval over the final?
No, he covered that. No. Apparently he impressed them so much they were laissez-faire with it. But yeah, no, I get it. I'm not thank you. I get it. Look, when you say stuff like that, any Scientologist who might be watching, they're going to switch right off. Now, let me illustrate.
Say stuff like what?
What that person just tweeted on the bottom of the
screen.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Xenu is my homie?
You got it. Yeah.
But that's not true because most Scientologists have never heard the word Xenu.
That's the point. But
it's they're going to make them turn off. They're going to think it's not even true. They're not even going to know what it means.
Well, okay. So you just illustrated my point. So you know that, right? So he estimated about 3.5% of Scientologists are clear and 0.4 have started OT7. So yeah, I would estimate people have done OT3, 3%. So when people keep talking about this OT3 stuff, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it's a straw man. It's like less than 1 in 20 Scientologists.
What's the straw man? The
straw man is to assert that the OT3 doctrine is what Scientologists believe.
Nobody has said that's what all Scientologists believe. In fact, I can tell you most people who discuss it, and 100% of the time that I discuss it, I say most Scientologists have never heard the Xenu story. But it is also, if we use truth, capital T truth, that is what Scientology believes, even if most Scientologists are unaware of it.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you. I don't have a problem with what you're saying. I'm just trying to point out that surely you must recognize that it creates an additional barrier for, like, okay, when I first came out, one of the first things I listened to this was, I think, 2018, 2019, I was listening to Joe Rogan podcast at the time, and Leah Remini made an appearance on Joe Rogan, and I was like, ooh, I'll listen to this. And that was very nervous for me. You probably know, the first time you like step out and really listen to a critic, it was my whole life, and it was nerve-wracking. And then Leah would go into the OT3 story, and I found myself like turning off the podcast for a few minutes and coming back to it, like skipping, and it made it harder for me. So I believe that I know other Scientologists who sort of have that same reaction. I'm not just talking about the OT3 story. I think there's, what am I saying? Let me jump
in for a second.
Go.
Because there's a little bit of an irony in the fact that we're on opposite sides of this talking point, at least in this current conversation, because I have explained many times that the reason I am so fair and accurate when I talk about Scientology, aside from the fact that the longer I spend out of Scientology, the easier it is for me to joke about some of these things.
Of course.
But the reason I'm so fair and accurate is, to the best of my ability, is because I do intend to create content that is that I believe is relatable to someone who's still in the Scientology bubble. And that because I personally, when I was 17, 18, 19 years old, was living in Hollywood. There was a 2-year period where I had no actual connection to Scientology. And I was working at this internet cafe on Hollywood and on La Brea called Cyber Java. And this is relatively early days of the internet. And I stumbled upon that clambake, xenu.net, whatever the fuck website. And the stuff on there was so, to me at the time, objectionable, degrading, joking, exaggerated, generalities, that it turned me off. It was offensive. I spent 15 more years in Scientology. So the irony is, you're kind of making the argument that the content me and my friends are putting out would be doing that exact same thing to present people, which I appreciate the argument and I understand the sentiment. And I guess I guess you can always become the thing that you hated. But on the one hand, me and the other SPTV creators are contacted all the time by people in Scientology who are watching our stuff and love it. And like, you have no idea how many people, you know, are watching. And so I guess I sort of feel like I have an objective test that I think we're doing it right. But at the same time, anyone could always come along and do it differently. And that would be totally okay too.
Yeah. And that's the question. So I considered,
but I have to say, though, the idea that former Scientologists shouldn't talk about Xenu is insane to me, because this story and the fact that people spend thousands of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars telepathically auditing body thetans, and this is all associated with the Xenu story, has so much to do with understanding the actual Scientology experience. And I'll go one step further. If I was in Scientology and I heard from someone who I thought was credible and fair and accurate and had a track history of being fair, if I had heard about the Xenu story and I found out that the OT levels were literally telepathically auditing tens of thousands of thetans stuck to you, that would have opened up my eyes. And don't you think that is talking about Scientology instead of talking about just the Church of Scientology or David Miscavige, but talking about Scientology itself? I mean, isn't that what Xenu is, the OT3 story?
Ultimately, it is definitely a part of it. And for some people, it obviously forms the bedrock of their worldview. It just never did for me. And when I heard the story, it doesn't bother me. I can see how it's an extrapolation of everything that comes before it. So it doesn't it doesn't have that. It didn't have that same reaction to me when I heard it. I was like, oh, okay, like whatever. Like it was a bit of a no issue for me.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm querying it is, so I listened to you on Lex. That was actually the first time I came across you. And, you know, you said that you want people, like you're saying now, you want Scientologists to come to your channel. And what I would say is, I don't think you've become what you hated. I don't think so, Aaron. I think you are doing a good job. What I would say though is, you, like, as you commented, you've been, like, the longer you've been out of Scientology, the easier it is to joke about it and so on. To Scientologists, as you would know, that can be very abrasive. Now, I didn't want to come here and just criticize you. I actually have a proposal for you, which would be to create a safe space playlist, honestly. And you might think that's weird. But I have a good example from Australian culture. So we have an Indigenous population in Australia, Aborigines, and I'll read all these little things that are popping up afterwards because I keep losing my train of thought.
I'm only putting up the ones that don't require responses.
Oh, okay.
Because I'll save the ones that require responses for when we're ready to engage.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So the Aboriginal population here, part of their culture is it's like a real taboo to see dead people from their culture. So whenever you have a documentary that has Aboriginals that have passed, because it's the taboo is, even if you show them alive, but they have passed since, that's part of the taboo. So when you get an Australian documentary that has Aboriginal people in it, that might have passed, at the start of the documentary, it actually gives you that black screen with some text and says, Aboriginal people be advised that, blah, 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 blah. Now, you might think this is a bit pedantic or going too far, but I would make a separate playlist and put up a thing at the start and say, in this video, I'm not going to talk about any confidential information. I'm not going to use, mockery or satire. I'm going to, it's just a different mode of doing it. And you could do some of your videos like that and just create a playlist. And then you could just mention that in your other videos. Like, look, if you're a Scientologist and you're uncomfortable from some of the things I'm saying, I've got these videos here and you can start there. Like, it's start here, Scientologist. That something like that could, because my argument, don't misunderstand me. My argument is not to change what you're doing or stop what you're doing. I think you're doing a good thing.
Okay, understood. And I guess, I guess my own personal content and style and wherever I might draw the line. Like, for example, here's a hard line that I have. There are some forums, like on the Underground Bunker blog, where Tony and his commenters regularly refer to Scientologists as clams. I think that's disgusting. I think it's disgusting. It's degrading. No Scientologist would even get the joke. They seem to have created this exaggerated idea that all Scientologists are fixated on the fact that in one of L. Ron Hubbard's books, he talks about the human jaw evolving from the hinge of a clam. No Scientologist has ever given a damn about that chapter in that book ever.
That's right.
And so the fact that they've created their own little derogatory word for Scientologists, I find literally disgusting. So
thank you.
That's an example of a hard line that I have. When I first started my channel, I probably would have hesitated to laugh and joke about OT3. It's just that it's so hard to even say it out loud without chuckling because you realize how stupid it sounds as you're saying it. So I'll laugh about it now. So it's possible that is it the Overton window? What's the thing where what's considered normal gradually changes over time? I forget. There's some word for it. So it's possible that my own line has shifted, and that's okay. But that's also why I like the fact that we're doing this SPTV thing, and you could have 20 different people talking about it their own different way, and everyone's going to have their own style. Yes, Overton window is what I was looking for there. Let me ask you this, because I do think it's an interesting conversation. Are there other examples that you can think of that you're like, I believe this is an example where the conversation might be actually hindering Scientologists from hearing the message?
Yeah, so to your example of the clams, Mike Rinder regularly, I haven't seen it for a while, and I know he's, I wish him well, but he regularly used to refer to Scientologists as sheeple when talking about the bubble. And that is, again, like, that's just not, I think that's disgusting, personally. I mean, as if all Scientologists, let me tell you about now. When I spoke to Chris, did my interview with Chris Shelton, where I told my full story, if anyone's interested about like what happened to me and how I got here. But I definitely flagged there's a difference potentially between Australian Scientology and American Scientology. You guys have, you have states banning abortion over here and then doing castrations of minors over here. Trans stuff.
Whoa,
right?
whoa! Don't get political. Don't get political.
But no,
now.
I know. But I'm not saying I didn't throw my hat in to say what my point of view on all those is. I'm just saying the fact is you have some serious stuff going on, and religion for you guys is like major. We don't necessarily have that over here in Australia, But so in terms of me being an Australian Scientologist, and in terms of Scientologists being sheeple, I have never known Scientologists who don't have qualms about management, who don't privately say some very interesting things, stuff that you have said and I have said and others have said too. So the idea that they're all sheeple, I see it more of a fact as like they just are so sold on the concept of the bridge that it's what's the phrase? He who has a why can bear any how. It's like, if you have a reason like this, I'm going to go free, you might tolerate the Holocaust to get there. And that's terrible. It's called consequentialism, and it's not a good idea. But yeah, so called Scientologist sheeple is like, but maybe in America, maybe you have sheeple in America. I don't know. Maybe they all do follow
I take your point. I could agree with you on that. I can tell you that when I talk about living in the bubble,
Hmm.
because you've mentioned that to me before, and I would say those are words I specifically choose because I reflect on my own time spent. I almost want to say, I say in the bubble as opposed to brainwashed or conditioned or programmed, because those are words I find objectionable because they have no meaning. They're sort of hyperbolic. And what did we all become like? When were we brainwashed? When were we unbrainwashed? And it's sort of a CIA mind control term kind of bullshit anyway. So I go, but here's what I
want to
mean.
talk more about that later, but yes.
Okay, because here's what I mean. When I was in Scientology, I was in, I say the bubble, right? Where
So was I.
It did not ever even cross my mind. It wasn't even on the table that something said at an international event could be exaggerated or false. And you go,
oh,
so
really?
Never, not even once.
Okay, well, it was for me all the time. I used to laugh at the events. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I say that out loud, I go, Jesus Christ. Anyone hearing me say it would be like, God, you're stupid. I go, but I'm not stupid. Like, I know I'm not stupid. And you go, so how do you explain a lack of critical thinking skills? For me, it's easier to just casually say you're inside the bubble. You're inside the bubble. It's whether it's an echo chamber, whether it's a prison of belief. I just like saying inside the bubble. But is that an example of one of the things that you think is a little off-putting?
No, I don't think that the concept of the bubble is off-putting. I think that we just have to really interrogate who's creating the bubble. I think that it's been created from both sides. I don't think it just exists because of Scientology policies and what Aaron Hubbard said. I think that when Leah Remini says stuff like Scientologists have to study 2.5 hours every day, or she did a recent excerpt from one of her podcasts on Twitter maybe a month ago where she was talking about study, and it was like, there's these people who walk behind you and they like tap you on the shoulder and take you to another room and force you on the e-meter and drill MUs out of your head. And it was like, I mean, she's hyperbolic continually, but it was like, when you listen to stuff like that, when I listened to stuff like that when I was still coming out of Scientology, it would just send me back to Scientology. I was like, okay, these guys are lying. So the bubble, therefore, gets created by both sides.
It's so funny that you're taking the position I've always taken, and yet we're still on opposite sides of this conversation. I love it, actually. It's interesting to debate. It's funny you mentioned the Leah studying exercise because those have always bothered me, and I've told her that.
Yeah.
But you know what's funny?
It's not true.
But here's what you and I actually don't get is that for her, that was actually more true than it was for you and me.
Right.
She is someone who would have to, even when she was filming her show, the show would wrap, she would have to go to Cece to get her 2.5 hours in. Whereas another celebrity who was less dedicated as her wouldn't have done that. When she was on hiatus, she was at Cece. When she was filming, she was at Cece. Now, because I feel like I bend over backwards to not exaggerate anything to do with Scientology, it has always rubbed me the wrong way when she says all Scientologists have to be on course 2.5 hours every day or else. Because we go, that is not true. Why do you say it that way? But that's how she says it. That's just how she says it. I don't know. And yet when I talk to her about it, I then learn, yeah, that's pretty much how it was for her. She was not treated like some super special, do whatever you want, whenever you want. Like, she was hardcore. But anyway, I guess you would say, yeah, but she shouldn't say it like that.
Well, I think not quite. I think it's a matter of understanding that Scientology isn't, this is why I bring up the Australian differences. Scientology isn't the same in every country, and it's not the same. The experience of an international celebrity in America is different to a nobody, me, in Australia. And Mike Rinder's experience in the top of the Sea Org is different to your experience. You would have been in PAC, I assume, or something like that. So mid-level management. And
I was in Philly and Flag and PAC. Okay,
so mid to high level management. I'm in Australia. I was in the CLO, the CPLO, and the AO. Lower level management, but still management. So it's the experience at every level is different. So I would just object to anyone saying all Scientologists do blah. I'm like, it's just bad critical thinking. I'm like, what, all Scientologists?
I agree with you. I agree with you. And maybe I guess that part of my pushback on what you're saying is pushback that you think I do it, because I don't think that I do.
No. I reached out to you to have the discussion and for the platform and just for the debate and for the fun of the conversation.
Okay.
I'm not accusing you of these things. No, it's just
I can tell you. I can tell you, I've seen a video where Chris Shelton said, "Oh, I just want to be totally clear. There is not a single part of Scientology that is helpful in any way, shape, or form." And I just thought that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard anybody say. Like, how can you say that? How can you say that? You're ignoring what actually traps people into these cults, which is that there are helpful pieces. Now, I'm sure he would walk it back and go, "Oh, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. Of course, they're helpful at the lower end, but," and I go, "Everything you said after but, I'm done." Like, if you have to qualify your statement so heavily, don't make the statement to begin with.
Right. So I did my first interview with Chris. I was very nervous. If anyone watches, you'll see me kind of looking like a deer in headlights because I had never been on camera before. I was like, "What am I doing?" And I have a bit of a story which I want to tell what happened with Chris and I after that, but I didn't know who else to turn to. And I was like, am I just excommunicated now from this community? Like, am I not allowed to be? Well, that's what Chris did to me. He's basically excommunicated me. I'm like, okay, great. Now I'm excommunicated from the anti-Scientology community. But I was like, but hang on, what is the anti-Scientology community? And to argue against or to use my own thing, it's not like just the same as all Scientologists are not the same. Not all people, former Scientologists are not the same. So it's like, hang on, why don't I check out some other? So I found you, and you, from what I understand, you now have the biggest audience. So I was like, okay, I'll reach out to Aaron.
Oh, I didn't even know that you had some story of something that happened. And we don't have to get into that. We could here. One person is saying here, can we move on? Can we move on from the discussion of the pejoratives and get to the interesting stuff? That's totally okay with me.
What's the interesting stuff?
Probably the things in the Twitter. You said we could debate this, we could debate that.
Oh, right. Okay.
Let me take up a couple questions here. What's the highest point you got on the bridge?
I did the happiness rundown as that was in the GT1 period. And then I would endlessly get sent back to doing PURIF and objectives. I've done the PURIF 3 times and I've never had any drugs in my life, being a second generation Scientologist. And I had done the Golden Age of Tech 2 Upper Indocs and PDSSP course. And I'm also a basics completion.
Okay. The basics completion is an awful lot of books and lectures, but otherwise, very low level in the bridge, much like me. The highest bridge step I ever attested to completing was the purification rundown. And that was despite being on staff and in the Sea Org until I was 26 years old, from 12 years old to 26. Okay. Let me see. Burke in Order says, Jason seems to be saying that he's not approaching the subject with kid gloves, which isn't entirely wrong, but I'm also not going to get everyone. Safe space playlist isn't a bad idea, though. Okay, Maria, AA Run, why did he leave Scientology? Because it seems like he still has a foot in the door. Is there a quick answer to this?
I had a very bad session, and I was called psychotic, and I believed it because the people who called me psychotic, I thought the world of. And you see Chris's podcast. I think it's episode 289 or 389. But if you just search my name on Google or Chris's podcast, you'll see the full story. As far as me still having a foot in the door, no and yes. I'm not a Scientologist. I'm not an independent Scientologist because my understanding of independent Scientologists, so they still believe in Hubbard, but not in the like Miscavige and the church and whatnot. Mm-hmm. That's not me. I'm just interested in analyzing it philosophically, and I have found that a lot of the ideas in there are in other societies, other cultures, other religions that aren't like, I don't have this viewpoint that it's all bad. Like I see a lot of stuff there. I'm like, oh, okay, it's interesting. Also, I'm going to be doing a doctorate on this subject. I know exactly what I'm going to do it on, but I'm keeping that a little bit close to the chest because I don't want some other academic to come and take it. But who's closer to it. But
does anyone have to think it's all bad? Well, you say it's not all bad. Like, I don't think it's all bad.
Chris Shelton thinks it's all bad, and John Atack seems to think it's all bad too. Leah seems to think it's all bad, and Mike seems to think it's all bad.
I disagree with Mike. I mean, Mike wouldn't say that.
Okay.
And I think what Leah says, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to qualify it. I think what Leah says in private is different than what she says in public. And I don't mean she's two-faced.
No, she's on an activist mission. I get it.
No, I mean, when you talk to her privately, you sort of get to the deep and the substance, and that's where you'll get the, yeah, but of course, but I meant this. Her public statements, I think, are more, I think she has done, and I'm not speaking for her, but I think she has decided that in order to explain Scientology in the easiest way, in the quickest way to people who have no idea what you're talking about, she has distilled her experience down to certain anecdotes or statements that, strictly speaking, you and I might be able to go, okay, so that's not entirely accurate. And she goes, to the millions of people who have no idea what you're talking about, it doesn't matter if that statement, like the 2.5 hours a day, when she goes, every Scientologist has to study for 2.5 hours a day. Well, we can go, well, that's not really true. And she goes, look, it's not worth explaining to everybody the nuance of when it's true and when it's not true, and when you're enrolled on a major course and when you're between courses and when you're on an LOA and when you have a CSW. She go, who gives a shit? I'm trying to explain the culture. I'm trying to do this. So on the one hand, I guess I'm saying, yes, that's not strictly speaking an accurate statement, but I don't think she's intending to be misleading. It's just hard to talk about these things publicly sometimes without getting buried in the weeds. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like I don't practice this connection, and I like Leah. I'd love to meet her and have lunch with her one day. I mean, I'm on the other side of the world, and she probably wants nothing to do with me. But this is not my statement at all. That I dislike these people or anything. But what you were saying about she thinks it's better to just give the overall thing, and yeah, that's one approach, and that's fine. But it's not my approach. I disagree. I think it's better to go over the nuance. But I'll qualify that. I think it's even better that people are doing different sorts of analysis on Scientology. I think that's what's important. So more power to Leah, hopefully more power to my approach as well. It's like we can do both. And the people who, it's not like everyone in the world has to read a book like I might write, which goes into like the nitty-gritty philosophical analysis. What, everyone has to read a book on Scientology now to understand it? Like, no. But at least there would be such a book if people cared to read it. And I know, because I've had people reach out to me after I did the podcast with Chris, only a few, but enough to say, hey, can't wait for you to do this work because I've been dying for it. So there are people out there who are like, I speak to people who have watched Going Clear and The Aftermath, the original TV show and whatnot. And they say, so what is it? So in other words, it's like, yes, it shows the culture. It shows that the church is doing bad things, but it's a bit like saying, if you never heard of Christianity, like, hey, they believe there's this guy who walks on water, and you know that they killed people in the Middle Ages, burning them because they thought they were witches, and that's Christianity. And they thought he raised from the dead. It's like, yeah, that's not Christianity. That's part of it, but it's not what Christianity is. So yeah, I think we can do more than one approach.
I appreciate that. And actually, it's one of the reasons I just, without even knowing what you wanted to talk about specifically, I said, yes, let's do this. Once I found out you were not a former Scientologist, you were born and raised, right?
I was born and raised, yeah.
Once I found that out, I was like, okay, as long as you're not coming on this channel to specifically dump on and insult everyone else who's doing channels, there's literally nothing I'm not willing to discuss. I find these conversations helpful, interesting, fun, like, and we haven't even gotten to the real conversations. So, but that's why I wanted to bring you on, because I thought you were anyway. When I thought you were just someone who'd never been in Scientology and was studying Scientology from an academic perspective, I didn't trust where you were coming from. But once I found out you were born and raised, I was like, oh, it doesn't matter where you're coming from. I mean, you have as much right to an opinion on this stuff as. And I'm perfectly capable of talking with you about any of it, because what am I going to get all triggered? I don't give a shit.
Good.
So
I can give you an example of the sort of analysis I would do, by the way, if that's what people are asking. Like, I have some examples already that I've come across at uni and go, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Go ahead. Let's hear one.
So all Scientologists have to clear their words. And this is from a bulletin specifically called Clearing Words. And in there, my major is linguistics. And I recently reread that policy bulletin from the point of view of my linguistics understanding. And I can now look at it, and it passes in my mind very differently. So I should have brought it with me. My old student hat pack's in the other room. He says that you know, I wish I had it because it would give me the exact wording, but he says, you know, when you clear the etymology, the derivation, it gives you a basic understanding of the word. Now, I can say from a linguistics point of view, that's not sound. That's not how etymology works. That's not how words work. But that doesn't mean that looking up etymology.
And I can say that in my entire time in Scientology, looking up the derivation of a word has never helped me once.
Right. Well, it does help me, but that's probably because I'm a linguistics nerd. So I love etymology. I'm like, oh, where did it come from? Oh, you know, like I did my paper on my level 3 paper in linguistics on the transition from Old English to Middle English. You know, so when a word, they're like, oh, it comes from Old English or Middle English. I'm like, ooh, like I'm all nerdy about it. So I love etymology. But yeah, like I get it from I do remember being in the church too, and etymology was a bit like.
But the idea, L. Ron Hubbard's idea that you could not possibly have a full conceptual understanding of what this word means in this context and other contexts, unless you read the etymology of the word. And I stress read, because you're not required to remember it. You're not required. You're not tested on it. You're not required to know it. So we can't pretend that it actually matters. It might be interesting from a linguistic standpoint, but it certainly does not help you understand the material you're reading to know the Old English etymology of that word. It's absurd.
Agree. It gives additional context. Even context is interesting. It's an interesting claim, but it doesn't mean that his claim that when you go past a word you don't understand, you know, you therefore don't understand the text. I'm like, well, that's an okay idea. But do I believe in the second phenomena of an MU and all the rest of it? No, probably not. So it's a window into it's kind of hard. You know, I'm primarily a writer, so I would write this out and give the arguments for and against and so on. The other thing that I could say about HOB clearing words is where he says you've got to clear the other definitions of the word, right? So originally in, I think it's like 62, 63, 64, when he does the student hat tapes at St. Hill, did you ever do a student hat? Because you were student.
Probably done it 4 times. I've done the drills 25 times.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So in the student hat lectures, he basically says you just look up a word and then you just basically move on, right? Like it's very simple. But then later on, he comes out with a HOB saying, no, you've got to clear all the other definitions as well.
Yeah. There's an entire lecture called Evaluation of Information on the Student Hat course, where he basically says you could read an entire text and ignore half of the words you don't understand and you would be okay.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? But the point I want to make from a linguistics perspective is the idea that you can go and clear all the other definitions of a word is more problematic than Hubbard seems to think, because words are always coming in and out of meanings. Language is much more complex.
I have to stop you here from only this perspective. Who in the hell do you think cares about what we're talking about right now?
Well, you know, if my studies turn out to be a minority thing on the side, I'm totally fine with that.
No, but I mean,
fine.
are you bringing, like, this might be interesting just from an academic sense, but like, there's no Scientologist who's running across our videos who's going to go, geez, you guys just aren't giving enough weight to derivations. So, but like,
yeah, sure.
What is this an example of? Something you're going to use it for your thesis?
Potentially, I don't know. It depends if I do it from that perspective. I don't know if I would do.
But if not that, what is this an example of?
This is an example of the sort of things that interest me.
Oh, I thought you wanted examples of things you thought were being improperly misrepresented in the current conversation among.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. We could do that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you. Here's one. Let's just address this. Jason, how do you reconcile the fallacies of L. Ron Hubbard's resume while finding his writings truthful?
Well, first of all, Laurie, I didn't say I find his writings truthful. That's when I'm doing analysis of a writing, that doesn't mean I'm saying it's true. I'm just giving it a fair go and saying, well, let's weigh the pros and cons of what he's saying. As far as go on, you want to say something?
Well, I guess what I want to say something is, from an academic perspective, and even just from us having a chat, I find value in your position on this, right? But as far as and I don't want to use any buzzwords here that might have more meaning than I mean to give them. But let's say, as far as the phenomenon of former members speaking out, let's say someone goes, I just don't think people are spending enough time talking about the good parts of Scientology. I would want to go, What in the hell would be the point of that? Beyond acknowledging that there are things at the lower levels that people almost universally, even former members, will tell you they found helpful when they did them. Aside from helping people to understand how people get into cults, how people fall for Scientology, aside from being as accurate about that as possible, what in the world is the benefit of focusing on? But are we giving enough? Are we giving enough attention to the good parts? Like, isn't that Scientology's job?
Again, I'm not saying they're the good parts. I'm saying they're interesting and we can analyze them. But I can give you one answer to that, which is there's this claim that when people come out of Scientology, that can precipitate like a mental breakdown. And I definitely had one of those. It's like existential crisis, right? You're like, what the fuck's going on? But when you come out into a world that then says everything you ever knew was bullshit, that was very unhelpful for me. When people just go, the entire thing is wrong. L. Ron Hubbard's a con man. Everything he wrote was false. You know, if you go down Chris Sheldon's line of thought, it's to create, what did he tell me? Hubbardian slaves. You know, when you're told that, think about like a Muslim extremist who's like wanted to be a suicide bomber. You don't reach that guy by saying Islam is bullshit. That's not how you reach the guy. You go, yeah, no, I can see where you're coming from. I get these points in the Quran that are beautiful and so on. We just want to address these things over here. So I am going to write a book that I wished I had. And I've spoken to enough people to know that they wished such a book exists. And I've spoken additionally to family members and friends of Scientologists who go, yeah, but why do they actually do that? And when the answer is just, oh, because they're crazy and they believe in X word and they blah, 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 you know, it's like, yeah, but that doesn't really answer why they do that. But I do want to answer Laurie's question, unless you had something else to say on.
No, go ahead.
So in terms of the fallacies of the resume, it turns out that a lot of religious figures have been very controversial, said a lot of bullshit, and also philosophers as well. I think it was the philosopher Berkeley. He was selling tar water later in his life as like a cure for things. You know, like you drink tar water and it was like a cure-all. You know, and Schopenhauer pushed his cleaning lady down the stairs, you know, like she had like lifelong injuries afterwards. You know, Jesus was like, you know, anti-capitalist, would like go tip tables over in the markets. Muhammad married a 7-year-old girl, I think it was, you know, and some scholars say, oh, that's because he was trying to save her from something else. Maybe, maybe not. You know, like whether, so the High Court ruling in Australia on Scientology being a religion is a really interesting one. It basically, from what I got out of it, it says that regardless of what L. Ron Hubbard thought he was doing, when you have people several generations after that who think, who truly believe that this is their religion, it therefore becomes a religion. So, for example, if you were to go and prove that Muhammad was a bad guy, you actually probably would be surprised that most Muslims would still be Muslims. So the whole Hubbard thing for me is a little bit off to the side, because from my study of philosophers, it basically, my take on philosophers and religious leaders to some degree is basically you've got to be a little bit odd, and probably you're going to do some illegal things. Like you've got to create systems like this. It's, you know, like people with like families and like a, you know, nuclear family and 2 kids and a job, they don't write like Nietzschean philosophy. Like that just doesn't, you know, they're like, Nietzsche was like batshit crazy. And that's part, I think that's why philosophy is interesting. So as far as like the fallacies of his resume, to me, it's definitely an issue as far as if I was going to try and still be a Scientologist or defend the Church of Scientology or become an independent Scientologist. But that's not what I'm trying to do. So I don't, it doesn't,
that's fine.
It's like it's a yellow flag. It's not a red flag.
Yeah. Okay, here's something I want to address. Khaleesi D. As an outsider, it seems dangerous to say that a dangerous human trafficking cult is good in any way. It makes sense to say this what draws you in, but then I wouldn't encourage anyone to join.
Good. Go on. I don't want to encourage anyone to join.
I have a problem with this statement because it also implies that, and again, Khaleesi might feel like I'm about to misrepresent what she has really said here. It implies that, oh my God, The danger of someone joining Scientology is so great that it's okay to speak falsely about it if the goal is to keep people from joining. And I have a problem with that statement. I think it's important to have people understand what are the parts at the lower levels that people, when they get introduced for the first time, are like surprised at how much they feel helped by some of these things, because these are common sense, everyday life coach, motivational guru type stuff. It doesn't get, you're not learning about Xenu. You're not learning about the fifth invader forces. You're not learning about the implant stations. It's common sense stuff that no one in any dimension would confuse with religion either. It's not religious either. It's not religious stuff. How to handle work, how to handle communication, how to get along with others. So again, I have heard this. It's dangerous in any way to tell people that there was any part of it you liked, because someone might mistakenly join Scientology. I think that's a straw man argument, because there's no one who listens to former Scientologists talking about Scientology who would be confused as to what the overall takeaway was, just because someone happens to talk about this one thing that they really got a lot out of in Scientology. You couldn't possibly be confused about that. Anyway, that's my rant. What's your opinion on this?
I agree. It's interesting. On one of the Leah Remini Aftermath episodes, I think it was when she interviewed Paul Haggis, and Paul Haggis said something about, like, because it works at the lower levels. And Leah said, I know, but I don't want to say that on air. I mean, the producers obviously put it on air anyway. Because Leah has that position too, I think, of like, it's so it can suck you in, and then it's dangerous, and now you're in a cult and whatnot. My argument against that is, I think there is something to it, but also, what are we, like, people are babies and they can't think? Like, it sort of presumes that most people in society are like suckers, and I think that anyone, like, the Church of Scientology is done as far as members go. Like, as far as new members coming in, people Google things. Like, what person wouldn't Google? If you're not going to Google Scientology before you go into a Church of Scientology, hey, that's on you. Go join. You know what I mean? Like, why would you do that? Like, it's just silly. But what I want to say to Khaleesi as well, I disagree that Scientology is a dangerous human trafficking cult. Scientology might participate in human trafficking to some degree, but that's not what it is.
I agree with you.
It's not what it is.
I agree with you. And I have come to calling Scientology a human trafficking cult because, honestly, it tickles me to describe it that way. But
right.
But the Sea Org workforce and the staff workforce, and particularly how the Sea Org has taken to heavily recruiting from Eastern European, even Ukraine and South American countries, it is an organization that has, to an increasingly larger and larger degree, depends on trafficking for its very existence. And so I would make the argument it is not an inaccurate description.
In Australia, it's actually Asians. We get a lot of Taiwanese and Indonesians and so forth. And in fact, if you go to the AO in Sydney, the majority of the people doing the OT levels are actually Taiwanese, not Australian, which is just an interesting tidbit. It's there's something to be said about choice in Scientology. Because I signed my SEAL contract when I was 13 and a half, and I knew what I was doing. It was a very conscious decision. And it says in the code of a SEAL member that, you be right out square two or whatever. It's like, I will do this wherever the line of duty carries me. So I always understood that I could be sent to Africa or blah, 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 blah. But I have heard of Asians coming down. They come down to Sydney, and it becomes apparent. They basically spaz out on the EPF. It becomes apparent that they weren't told what was going on. I grew up in Sydney, and that's where the Sea Org is in Australia, in Sydney. So to me, I went in, I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was getting into.
Jason, what about somebody would say at 13, you're not capable of at 13 consenting to agreeing to sign your life away to work for a cult?
I tend to agree with that. I think that, one interesting thing, if you notice, the big people speaking out, Leah, yourself, Mike, Chris, me, whoever else, Serge's documentary, all second generation Scientologists. And I think that there is a very fascinating question there about like, this academic, he commented on like, church numbers are down and if the Church of Scientology is going to survive in its current form, it's going to come down to like how they, Scientologists raise their young and continue like, intergenerationally. And I'm like, no, I don't think Scientology is designed that way. I don't think you can actually, it's not a religion you can enforce on kids. So yeah, I agree.
What do you mean it's not a religion you can enforce on kids? I would disagree.
Because the very basic premise of auditing is free will and free choice.
That's cute when you write it on paper. That's not what auditing is about. A pre-clear doesn't have free will and free choice. They can't even get up and end the auditing session when they choose to.
You choose to undergo that procedure. So I have a friend who does.
And if you change your mind, you're not free to unchoose it.
Of course, but there's some things in life that are like that. If you join the army, you can't just like go out at any point. Like there are things in society. If I go take a corporate job, I have to give them 2 weeks notice I can't just leave.
Sure, but you said Scientology can't be enforced on children, and the children are the easiest person to enforce something like that.
Oh, I'm not,
because they don't have any free will even in their regular life.
No. Sorry, maybe we're misunderstanding each other.
Oh,
Scientology shouldn't be enforced on children. That's my claim. My claim is that like 90%, not 90%, 50% of the church's problems might go away if they just said, you know what? We don't do kids anymore. Like that's, you got to be 18. That's more my thing. Like I read Dianetics for the first time when I was 13 as well. I didn't get through the whole thing, but there are R-rated concepts in Dianetics, R-rated, X-rated even. It's like that a child should not read that stuff. I'm not saying whether Dianetics is true or not. It's just, it shouldn't be around kids. So that's more my statement with the church. It just doesn't seem, the Scientology, it seems to me an inappropriate thing for children to do. And I think it's indicative that most of the people speaking out heavily are second generation Scientologists.
I get that. Okay, let's tackle this one right here. Does Jason's opinion tend towards Hubbard's work that he's, does Jason's opinion tend towards Hubbard's work that he's often derived good processes for malformed purposes, and so not to dismiss it out of hand? I'm sorry, I'm not there's something about this question I'm not getting.
Yeah, I'm not getting it either. Sorry.
Hubbard's does the opinion that Jason has tend towards that Hubbard has often derived good processes for bad purposes, and so do not dismiss it out of hand. I think it's safe to say this is not what you're saying because we're not entirely sure what they're saying you're saying.
Maybe ask the question again. It sounds like an interesting question. I just don't quite get it.
Yeah. Apologies, Ace-X. Okay. Mac Mill. SPTV has two objectives. 1, stop WOGs joining. 2, push existing members out. I think Leah's approach is best for former, and Aaron's for the former and for the latter. I think they're a little bit in tongue in cheek asking about the WOGs. As an Australian though, were you always aware that WOG was a racial slur down for you guys, or is it?
Yeah, so we actually, in Australia, I thought this was an Australian word, but WOG means basically, like Greek or Italian or so forth. Is that what you have in America too? But it's Australian.
But is it because they're great people, or is it a slur?
Oh, it depends who you ask.
Oh, come on!
Nah, Australia's pretty interesting. We're pretty
It's not a compliment.
No, it's not a compliment. No, fair enough. But
you're saying it's just descriptive.
It's just that in Australia, there's a saying: you call your mates dickheads and your dickheads mates. So, like if my best friend comes to me and says, what's up, Dixon? Because my name's Jason, so he'll say Dixon or Fuxon or something like that's great. If someone is Australian starts swearing at you to address you, you've got a good friendship going.
Okay, so in Australia, no one's come up to you and said, how you doing, WOG?
Right, but if I had a friend who was from there is a good chance that would become part of our hello routine.
But because it's a slur and you call your friends dicks and your dick's friend or whatever.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Okay, but hold on. Yeah. Let's just cut through the bullshit. WOG is a racial slur in Australia. Yes. Whether you can jokingly call your friend that or not, it's a joke because it's a slur.
Honestly, I don't know if it's a full-on slur, but it sounds like it might be. I never used the word that much, so it's never been a thing for me.
There's a lot of slurs I've never used that much. Are you really saying you cannot say it's a slur?
So my hand's reaching for the dictionary now to find out, because I'm a linguistics nerd. I'm like, I don't know, how's the word used? It's just, I'm sorry, I just don't use the word. I don't know. I'm not trying to dodge the question. I just don't know.
Okay, fine. That's fine. Okay. There's another one I want to get on to. Destiny Salazar, would you consider that you may still be deconstructing from your time in Scientology? No disrespect, but your thoughts are a little bit all over the place. Okay.
Well, you know,
ahead.
the thoughts are all over the place because we're doing a very tongue-in-cheek, and this is the first time Aaron and I have spoken. We don't really have an agenda. It is actually how I talk. It's not to do with Scientology. I talk like this to everyone on every topic. I'm very digressive. I'm like the perfect guy to go into academia. It's like, I'm like, oh, you know. So yeah, don't think that the way I'm coming across is specifically to do with Scientology. As far as would I still be deconstructing from my time in Scientology? Yeah, probably. I would expect so. The difficulty for me is, in some ways, I would have preferred to just join the anti-community, if you will, and just be like, fuck this, because it would create like a line in the sand. And
hold on. What is the anti-community?
You know, Aaron, I feel like maybe I need to watch more of your stuff, because I've watched Leah and Mike and Chris, and those guys are anti. Now, whether they are behind closed doors, like you said with Leah and Mike, there's some more nuance. But I've spoken to Chris publicly and privately. Like, he hates Scientology. So that, to me, and I thought Chris was like the big podcasting guy. So I was like, oh, okay, like everyone hates Scientology. And when I did my podcast with him, there was a lot of comments on YouTube basically accusing me of being a Scientologist and saying like, oh, he's still got a lot to work through, and, you know, he'll come to see the truth eventually, which I'm going to do a digression here, which I think is hilarious, because do you remember in Scientology, in the bridge, right? You've got the awareness characteristics up the middle, right? So you literally become more aware, supposedly, when you do the Scientology bridge. That's the cell. Okay. Now, and the solution to doing that is training and auditing. That's the bridge. So you can go check out these comments on YouTube on my video with Chris, and the comments to me, it's like, oh, I see. There's like a reverse bridge I've got to now travel, because people are saying when Jason reads the right books and goes and gets some therapy, then his awareness will come up and he'll discover what Scientology truly is. It's just a terrible cult, and he will have truth revealed. And I'm like, oh, well, you guys are trying to sell me like a reverse bridge. Like, thanks, but no thanks. I love it.
A reverse bridge. I love it. I've seen the word anti-Scientology. Well, actually, for a while, some people I don't think very highly of started using the word the anti-Scientology cult. Now, first of all, honestly, I roll my eyes. People use the word cult to describe anything these days. You know, I used to, when I first started my channel, I actually wouldn't call Scientology a cult because I was so sensitive to the fact that it would be offensive to Scientologists. I've just simply moved on from worrying about that too much, to be perfectly honest. So I won't push back too hard on, you know, things like that. But it's also like everyone has their own experience in Scientology, and even though there's common threads through those experiences, people's individual experiences are incredibly different. Even Leah's experience as a celebrity is not the same as other celebrities' experiences. So to some extent, she's speaking for herself. So, okay, you said Mike, Leah, Chris. I don't, look, Chris made a big mistake trying to brand himself the critical thinker at large. The implication is that if it comes from his mouth, it's critical thinking. Anyone who watches his videos would disagree with that. I've deep, long, and personal experiences with Mike and Leah, and all I can say is I have never had to moderate or tone down or compromise on anything I've ever said or felt on the subject of Scientology when talking with Mike or Leah about it. And I've never felt that I've ever been anything but on the same page as far as, and even as I said that, I go, who cares if we're on the same page? I'm just saying it's not like there's some line in my world where, oh, there's the people who are fair and the people who are unfair. I think everyone's being fair to the best of their ability. And I think some of what was on the TV show might have ended up in the episode as opposed to on the cutting room floor, just because of the nature of the TV show itself. None of those TV shows were meant to be a nuanced discussion on the good and bad parts of Scientology.
Sure. And I, by the way, Aaron, I didn't say that the anti-Scientology point of view was unfair or wrong. Like there's a fair argument to make that, Scientology, the Church of Scientology is hurting people. That's undeniable. I've been through it myself, so how could I deny it? And to some degree, you have to ask yourself, well, is Jason's work going to be that important? Because it's like, get them to stop hurting people first, then we'll talk about it. Like in World War II, it's like you've got to defeat Hitler first, then you can do the academic work. Like you can't just academically talk to Hitler. So it's don't get me wrong where I think that what I just said, anti-Scientology people are wrong. I just think we can have different perspectives, and that should be allowed. I think
look when you, I just got my viewers are probably screaming at their screens right now. If you use the word the anti-Scientology community as something that's over here, then people are going to go, well, then what the hell are you? If you think that the, 20 or so people that the world largely thinks are having very genuine, emotional, sincere conversations of Scientology, if those people are someone you think those are the anti-Scientology people, then what are you?
Well, I don't think they're all anti-Scientology people. As far as what am I have no fucking idea. I haven't really thought of a category.
I'm sorry. Please let me rephrase my question.
Sure.
I'm not saying they're not anti-Scientology, because clearly all of us former Scientologists are against Scientology. We're against its policies and procedures. We're against children and the elderly being abused. We're against them having tax exempt status. It's not inaccurate to say that we are anti-Scientology. I'm referring to more of when it gets used as those are the anti-Scientology folks. What is it that we're doing that's different than what you think should be done or are doing?
Correct. I think it goes back to our earlier conversation that you've come a long way. Was it the Overton window we were saying? Yeah. And I'm just saying, and maybe you have another solution, or I'm sure you can think about this on your own. You have the channel, not me, and I basically don't have the time between uni and so on to create one on my own. But I really think that you could just put yourself in your own bubble from 15 years ago and create a playlist of videos like that separately and just have that space that's in the middle. I just think there should be. But
do you know what the problem would be? What that would be? A Scientologist is already not supposed to watch my channel. The chance that they're going to find me and then go, oh shit, let's look for the Scientologist friendly playlist. That's not even a thing. That's what I'm talking about.
I feel like there will be a minority with, a certain amount of people who would go for that. And, maybe it doesn't form a major part of your channel. It's a side project of those guys who are hurting in the church, but can't bear to hear it called a cult. That, who just, can't bear to deal with, SPTV or hear Leah's voice because they know Leah's bad. So maybe in those videos, that playlist, you start it with the AA run every time. You don't start it with Leah's voice. No, seriously, because they can get triggered, right? They're like, and what are we down to now? Like 25,000 active Scientologists or something like that?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so there's 500 of them who you might reach, or 100, or, one. Great. One person watches some of your videos and goes, oh, that was a video I could watch. I would have been one of those people. I absolutely would have been one of those people. I tried finding that content. I would Google it. I tried finding books. That's how I ended up on this. That's how I ended up going to university. I was like, well, if no one's going to do it, I'll do it. But and so to some degree it's on me. It's like, well, I'll have to do it. But frankly, it's going to be between 4 and 12 years by the time I get my studies done. So it's like, it's a long time.
Yeah. Let me say for the record, if you even if every single day you said, Aaron, I want to come on today and I want to do a video and I want to talk about the things you said yesterday that I wish you had said differently, I would let you come on every single day because I think conversations like that are actually a lot of fun.
Well, yeah.
Whether I'm right or wrong, I don't care. I just wanted you to know that's not something I find personally offensive.
That, but
my viewers might.
Right. I don't want to try and set myself up as the policeman though. Like it's not like I have some special senior viewpoint because I'm at university and I know better. I'm actually I self-published a few books in my time just for the fun of it, and I have a book coming out at the end of the year which I wrote as part of my undergraduate as a side project just for fun, and I basically deride academics and this sort of snooty ivory tower way of doing things. So I have a lot of sympathies for your approach over my approach. So don't think that I'm not reflective and like I get the irony of some of the things I'm doing. Jason, it's just no one else is doing it. So I just want to do it. Go.
What is different between my approach and your approach?
The nuance of it.
Give me an example.
Well, I've been trained in linguistics. I'll probably be trained in philosophy by the time I'm done, and anthropology as well. So I'm going to have a lot of theories and so on to work with, that I can then apply to the text and go, well,
who in the hell wants to hear a video about that?
Probably not many people. And that's why for me, doing a doctorate, it'll be a book, right? Because it's usually a book. Yeah. Look, I make silly stuff on Instagram, and I made a reel. You're welcome to pull it up now if you want. But I made a reel of like 5 different versions of me arguing about Scientology, like Jason the academic, Jason the student/writer, Jason the cult survivor, Jason the didn't get to be a musician. You just see the guitar in the back, and Jason the window cleaner, which is what I do part-time for income. And I have them basically argue at each other and basically, don't think that I have just one viewpoint on all this. It's just that I'll say it again. I just don't think that anyone's doing. Look, let's talk about Chris, right? So Chris is claiming that he's the one doing that work. He's not. He's not doing that work.
I don't. The amount of people who. Okay, let's agree on that. I don't. Okay, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Look, I'll tell the story.
I don't think anyone cares what Chris Shelton thinks he's doing.
I disagree. I mean, he has 47,000 subscribers on YouTube, and he's got
does not tell the story. Views tells the story, and his views are so low. I thought he wasn't making videos anymore. Nobody goes to YouTube to listen to Chris Shelton's lectures.
I did.
I mean, well, did it help?
No, not really. Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, and then you moved on.
Then I moved on to you. But look, Aaron, people, you're going for like the big perspective, and you're collecting the majority of the audience who and that's fine. And Leah's doing that, and Mike's doing that, and I recognize that my approach is going to be a minority. But however many people are watching right now, I guarantee you there'll be 5 who go like, "I'd read that book. That'd be interesting," and that's fine. I'm fine if I sell 5 copies. I'm happy. I'm like, great. I've done something important. I've helped 5 people.
Okay, so I guess what I'm reacting to isn't the idea that you think your particular approach would be unique and interesting and helpful. I guess what I'm reacting to is that you think everybody else should also be doing that.
No, I'm not saying that. I haven't said that. That's no. That's why I keep telling you, like, more power to you, more power to Leah. I'm just saying. Can we have this included? So partly my reaction is because there was a tiny little Twitter storm involving Chris, Ian, Rafalco, and another guy who basically, when I was doing some of these things like, oh, that doesn't quite mean that, then they would just come down on me and be like, you're supporting Scientology, you're supporting human trafficking. I'm like, and I guess to some degree, that's what I thought the community was. So I'm like, I
see.
Thank you, Summer. So, I lost my train of thought now, but
I'm only putting up comments that don't require responses, just so you know.
Look, if Summer reads my book and that's it, I'm happy. Like as a writer, I want to write what interests me. I don't want to write what's popular. Like it's not my intention isn't to do the popular. It's like if it's popular, great. That's a bonus. It's like, yeah. But Aaron, I feel like there's some part of each other we're not quite getting. I'm not saying that in any way that you or Leah or Mike should do any less than you guys are doing. What I am saying is perhaps, and I know you're going to come back on this straight away, and I know why, so let me then give you the rebuttal. Let me do what I'm doing too. Now, you guys haven't said that what I'm doing too isn't wrong, but others have. So I'm coming here because you have a big audience to say, when you see me on Twitter, when someone says like, verbal tech is a high crime and you can't explain anything about Scientology to Scientologists, and I go, not quite true. That doesn't mean I'm worshipping Hubbard and going and reporting to David Miscavige. It's just, that's the aspect I'm taking up.
I appreciate that. There was a comment before that. Well, I didn't put up because I thought it was a little too mean, but it was basically like, perhaps you should tell your own story instead of criticizing how other people tell theirs. And I was like, yeah, it seems a little mean.
Well, I did. No, that's fine. I'm fine. I'm aware doing this that some people are going to really not like what I'm doing. And I understand that. I did on Chris's podcast. It's 3 hours long. And I told my story. It could have been longer, but we sort of had to, it just kept going, right? But in telling my story on Chris's, that was for me to move on. Like once I've told the story, what am I going to keep going back there? That's what Ian's doing, in my opinion. Yeah. Just keeps telling the story. It's like, dude, you've told the story. Now move on, because I don't think it's helpful to stay there.
So I'll tell you what, just so you understand, this is intended to be a statement of support. One of the things I love about this phenomenon that we're calling SPTV is that we no longer we are now in a position, the former Scientologists, particularly the second gens, there are no more gatekeepers. Nobody needs permission to tell their story. No one needs permission to the right way to talk about Scientology. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as a channel isn't specializing in just shitting on other former Scientologists, that's a channel I can support. So like, let's say you had a channel. I know you don't have time, but let's just say that you did. And let's even say that you did think your way was, the best way. It's not fair, but I'm just saying, even if. I'd be happy to have you on every day or every week or whatever to be like, hey, tell me what you think we should be doing better. Only because it's an interesting conversation and because my viewers might like the opportunity to have a go at you. But I want you to know it's not. But that kind of content isn't content I would try to push to the fringe or not platform, because it's intellectually interesting as long as your goal isn't just shitting on people. Then I say let's have the conversation all day long. I don't care.
I appreciate that, Aaron. Two things. I don't think it's about doing it better. I just think it's about allowing different perspectives. That's all. And
okay, good.
You've been fine.
Then
but
just know it's allowed here. It's allowed here. It's allowed here.
And that's the second point is I'm feeling, because it's live, so this is really interesting. This is the first time I've ever been live. But to some degree, I feel like I've come to this, you've put it as a debate, which is funny, right? But I've come to this debate.
You called it a debate first.
No, I know. See, I was pushed from this little mini Twitter storm where I was like, oh, this is a debate. But I did clarify that I more want a discussion, whether you call it a debate or discussion. But I've come prepared for a different discussion, and you have surprised me immensely. I came prepared for another discussion with Chris or someone like that. I thought you were just going to be like, how dare you say anything? I made some notes. I was like, okay, bring up like the Holocaust and academics, and how if academics say the Holocaust, it doesn't mean they're supporting the Holocaust. Like I had all these things ready to go, but you're fine on all of it. So I'm like, oh, I have no need for any of my notes. So it's, to some degree, I've misunderstood you and your position. And I just really want to make sure that you understand that, that.
Mitch Brisker says, Aaron, if you change a thing, I'm unsubscribing. He's just having a go. But here's the thing, because since I did call this a debate, it's funny because let me read a couple other of the Twitter messages. I'm not going to read anything that there's nothing.
You can read whatever you like.
Because I go look. I see. I have no specific desire to debate any specific aspect of Scientology? You don't have something specific that you want to discuss with me? I was actually quite frustrated with my messages. I don't know if that came through. And I said, from what position are you looking to have a debate? From the position of an independent Scientologist? At this point, I still did not know that you were a former Scientologist. And I said, you keep referring to this as a debate. Could you at least provide some bullet points as to some of, the existing talking points that are out there that you disagree with? So anyway, I feel bad because I did call this a debate, and I wanted to say, look, hey, what's one thing you actually wanted to debate, and let's take a crack at it.
Well, we have, in regards to the OT3 stuff, we have debated that I think that it's given more weight than it should, because the majority of us never came across that in Scientology. But I feel like we did this.
All of the OTs have.
Sure. Yeah, and I feel like we had the debate already, but
okay.
Didn't I respond then with some bullet points? But see, my bullet points, like one of them was Leah's 2.5-hour study and so on. And I have a feeling if we go over those bullet points now, you're going to be like,
let me find them.
Well, we've discussed that, or why would we talk about that?
I'm looking through the messages.
I do want to tell my story with what happened with Chris, and I understand that might be a sensitive thing, but
I mean, go ahead. I'm not a big fan of Chris, but I try not to do the shit on Chris session because it's not helpful. But I mean, go ahead.
Look, it's not to shit on him. No, it's actually to encourage him, and which is where I came from with him. So I did my interview with Chris, and he knew I was at university, and he mentioned to me that he wanted to get some of his papers academically published, which means peer review. So I said, yeah, sure. Send me your thesis, his master's thesis, and I'll read it and give comments. So I did, and I commented through the same sort of feedback that I've gotten from uni for the last few years. And then when I sent it back to him, and I actually didn't tell him at the time, but I didn't think much of the thesis. I thought he was connecting dots that weren't there and taking things out of context, and it's certainly not science. It's definitely art, the arts he's practicing. Whether psychology is a science field or an arts field is hotly debated. So there's a lot of context there. But basically, when I sent him my reply, and I sent him a long email saying, look, there's a few things here I don't quite gel with, but I think you've got a great idea for a book. You could just connect these dots and blah, blah, blah. And he really started pulling back after that, because we were going to do a second podcast talking about linguistics and Scientology. And he said, he started, I noticed something was up, and I said, what's going on? And he's like, well, I'm really upset with you from your feedback. And I said, well, that's feedback. Like, that's what it is. Like, and it's friendly feedback. And he got upset that I was basically said Foucault's poison, because he did a Foucault citation. And I was like, watch out for Foucault, like Foucault's poison. I find it ironic for an ex-Scientologist to cite Foucault, because Foucault raped children in Tunisia. You can see, that's a real thing. You can Google that.
I don't know anything about all this because I grew up in a cult, but no, I'm just
I want to debate that with you. Yeah, go ahead. Let me finish my Chris story.
Go ahead.
So anyway, so he was sending me emails that I felt were belligerent and rude to me, and I just kept saying, look, Chris, it's just feedback. Like, don't worry about it. Like, it's okay. And he kept accusing me of criticizing him. So I eventually said, okay, I'll give you one point of criticism. You've skipped your undergraduate degree, and it shows. Because what the undergraduate degree is about isn't necessarily learning a whole bunch of stuff, but part of it is sitting in tutorials and discussing things with other students. And, I've had a student bring up in one tutorial, she's like, oh, I don't think rapists should be sent to prison. Now, the academic response to that is like, okay, explain what your argument is. Not like, you wouldn't freak out. You go like, well, why are you saying that? Like, you better have a fucking good reason. So Chris then, when I sent that to him, he then basically excommunicated me. He's like, I'm done with him. And you can see there's a public tweet where he's saying that as well. But the reason I wanted to bring up Chris is in flicking through your videos, I watched where you talk about Tony Ortega in relation to something that happened with the jury foreman or something. And you said that when Tony comes on board, because he's calling himself a journalist, you think he's an activist. I agree, but he calls himself a journalist, and that raises the stakes. It brings it up to a higher level. And what I want to call out Chris on is if he's going to call himself an academic, science, a master of science, and he calls himself an expert, he says it's not opinion, it's scientific what he's doing, then he needs to raise himself to those standards. It's totally fine what he's doing, but he claims himself to be an academic, and he's not, because academics have published papers that have been peer-reviewed. He doesn't, and he's not willing to take criticism. And Chris, if you're listening, I'm happy to go on your podcast because I don't disconnect from people. That's a Scientology fucking bullshit. So, I just wanted to tell your audience that, because it frustrates me when someone's saying, oh, I'm the only former Scientologist academic out there. I'm like, well, be an academic. So I'm not here to shit on Chris. I'm here to actually say, be an academic. Do it. He's capable of it. He's not a dumb guy.
That's fine. I think that's fair criticism. I think calling himself the critical thinker at large also raises the stakes, because it's like, be prepared for the arrows if that's what you're gonna do. And look, Chris disconnected from me as well. I think his last text message to me was, I would say have a good life, but I truly do not wish that for you. We will never speak again. It was so childish I didn't even respond to the text message. So look, I don't do dedicated videos. Anyway, let's move on from this if you don't mind.
That's fine. Totally fine.
Okay. So let me tackle some of these things here. Buffy Lynn said, never heard Mike say sheeple in 8 years of watching. Buffy Lynn, this is something Mike's put in a couple blog posts, and it only even sticks out in my mind because I've also seen people go after Mike for having said that word. Mike, I think, again, no intention to speak for him. The longer you are out and the more you reflect back on your own experience, and maybe even with some chagrin and embarrassment for how you yourself basically acted like a sheep, that I know in Mike's mind, when he says sheeple, he doesn't mean it as a slur. He means it as people who act like a herd of sheep who do not question. But you would say, no, they do question. They just do it privately, whatever. And maybe you go, the nuance has been thrown out the window. And I just think that over time, sometimes always being nuanced is exhausting. But I still think it's fair to point it out. Like, I probably wouldn't use the word sheeple in my videos, because as soon as it is about to come out of my mouth, I'd probably go, that's a little too insulting. I'm not going to use that word. I'll say people who are in the bubble. But it means the same thing.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But okay. I also realize that I also don't want to be like, oh, I'm always going to defend everyone, everything. I just know that it's not a mean thing. Calling someone a Scientologist is just insulting. But it's one of these things where if a former Scientologist does it, I go, well, you can say it. Tony Ortega does it. I go, no, you can't say it. You can't say it. And that's not fair either. That's not consistent on my part, right? Okay. Claire Alice says retelling stories is common in a lot of recovery. It's what AA is all about, but I agree. Some people may like that approach more. Space for everyone. Okay.
Space for everyone. I like that.
Gemmint, I would pay all of my rent money to have a go at him. Okay.
What does she mean by have a go? Like
because I said I would bring you on. I basically said my readers would probably love to have a go at you if every time I brought you on was Oh, okay. Anyway, let's see. Someone says Summer Sun, hate begets hate, even hate of Scientology. Let's love. I mean, yeah. Look, it's the philosophical point is sound. James Hunsinger is an old friend of mine. A pre-clear coming across this information could die. I broke my back when I found it. L. Ron Hubbard.
I'm a bit sick at the moment. You've probably seen the tissue come out a couple of times. So yeah, Aaron's definitely suppressing me.
Okay, Prince Muskie says, I apologize on behalf of all Australia.
Yeah, Chris framed my interview as the Scientology experience in Australia, as if I'm like some spokesperson for Australians, and I'm not.
Okay, Rusty says, loved comment on listening to Chris's lectures. Exactly. His narrative stuff is more likely to be interesting. His thinking is not so critical. And I hate to pile on, but it's like, Chris, you got to stop marketing yourself as the critical thinker at large. It's absolutely, it's silly. And you set yourself up for failure. No one is the critical thinker at large. Anyway,
yeah, it's
whatever.
a pretty big title, isn't it?
Especially when you're demonstrating every day such a lack of critical thinking. I mean, read the room a little bit. Okay, Claire Alice, Jason has a point. Yeah, Jason has many points, and his points are welcome here. Okay, Jen Mint, every time Jason says the word academic, take a shot. You'll be drunk in 5 minutes.
Hey, and Chris, and me saying Chris isn't an academic, neither am I. I'm an undergraduate, so don't take me as claiming to be an academic.
I mean, look, the point is, if you're trying to be an academic and you want to wage war on the battlefield of ideas, and you can't handle someone telling you that they have a problem with your ideas, you're in the wrong game.
Exactly.
You're in the wrong game. Let me see. I'm crazy in the head. Question, Jason, what do you think? Jason, do you think that with time, you will also become more comfortable with joking about Scientology?
Probably not, because the academic study I'm now heading toward is religious studies, and you basically get taught, indoctrinated, if you will. Academia has indoctrination too, but you get taught to respect all religions and so forth. So you'll probably find that part of my personality is not to disparage people for religious reasons.
Okay. So when you say disparage someone, I'd have never heard Scientologists be disparaged for being Scientologists.
I think they are, for sure. I mean, I remember a news article a while back. This was between celebrities. It was like Alec Baldwin accused someone of being a Scientologist or something. And I know this is mainstream media clickbaity stuff, but it was like, the name being labeled as Scientologist.
I didn't mean in the press. I didn't mean in the press. I meant, I don't think you've ever heard an SPTV channel criticize someone just for being a Scientologist.
Well, here's a question. If I was a Scientologist still, would it be acceptable? Yeah. Would it be acceptable to come on the channel and talk? Would you interview a Scientologist? Because Chris wouldn't.
Oh, sure I would, but they would never be allowed
that's great.
To. They would never be allowed to.
That's great to hear. So, yeah. So when I say I wouldn't disparage someone for being a Scientologist, but I would disparage someone for practicing disconnection and extreme ethics. Absolutely. So, just the same, I wouldn't disparage anyone for being a Muslim, but I'd disparage them for being an extremist. I wouldn't disparage someone for being a Christian, but I'd disparage them from, beating up on gays or something like that. Yeah.
Right. We have a good one here. Not a sheeple. What is wrong with my game?
That's brilliant. Yeah.
Let me see. I saw another one here. Oh, this is funny. Just respond to this one. Aaron will be criticized on the next channel Jason gets on, no doubt.
I'm just going to move around and bad.
Are you a serial criticizer?
Well, no. I think you'll find that that's my point here. Is I'm willing to even not criticize Scientologists. So yeah, no, right. I'm not. Okay. I am not criticizing Chris as a person. I am only criticizing his claim to academic rigor. That's all I'm criticizing.
Interesting. Renee B is in for some bad news. Chris cannot get a master's without a bachelor's degree.
You are
I'm a fan of Chris, but don't discount his education. Renee, you are incorrect. Chris does not have an undergraduate degree. Salford University agreed to accept him into their master's program because they said all of the work he had done on his channel, exploring, I guess, cults and coercive control, they were going to credit him with a 4-year undergrad degree.
And realize that is a new university. So just speaking from someone who's within academia at the moment or within the system, there is ego in academia. There are budgets to make. So there's a new university setting up a new course. They're going to be desperate to get students. The academics who run the course are going to be desperate to prove their ideas as truthful. So they're going to take in people like Chris. He did it online, a 1 year. You can listen to Chris say this himself on the
I thought it was 2 years. It was only 1 year.
From what I recall, I'm taking this from the Cult Vault is a podcast, episode 200, I believe Chris was on, around there. And at the end of that podcast, he tells his story, and he did it online. So he didn't even step on campus. And as I said, being at university is about being in the tutorials and having the debates. That's what he's missed. And from what I recall, he did it 1 year, which means Usually you can do a master's in 1 year if you've trained in the field already. So I could do a linguistics master's in 1 year, but I'd have to do a psychology master's in 2 years, for example. So they obviously took what he was doing as not only equivalency to an undergraduate, but specialist training in his area, which I think is a failure on the part of his supervisors to take him in like that. They let him down. They let him down.
Can I feel like I want to at least mention the fact that I have my own bias, which is that I think degrees are barely worth the paper they're printed on.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the internet has sort of leveled the playing field on access to information and academic ideas. And you can, I cannot tell you how much I enjoy just listening to hours upon hours upon hours of some of the most famous academics arguing about some of the most basic things, such as fucking Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson arguing about the definition of truth for 3 hours. That's a little overbearing, but you used to have to be in a university to hear a conversation like that. And now you just need a YouTube account. So I sort of cringe when people get all uppity about degrees, but I have a very anti-formal education bias from all my years in Scientology. What do you make of all that?
Yeah, I share some of those concerns, hence the book that I'm going to self-publish at the end of the year. So I'm going to get a degree and then I'm going to write an anti-intellectual book, essentially. Well, I've written it. It's going to come out. And what you're saying is true. Things are changing and the university is under a lot of fire for some of the bullshit left-wing stuff they put out. And I think university has been great for me because I come from a very conservative background, as I assume most Scientologists would. So to get the liberal ideas has been great for me. Like it's given me a bit of balance. I would say about university that, yeah, you pretty much could listen to podcasts, read books, and so on, and get the same level of education. But it's a game.
I didn't say that. I didn't say.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a game. But what university is good for is the interaction and the debates. Like you're learning how to do these debates and write academic papers, and it's a skill set. And I make no claim to it being, superior. It's just a different lens to look at things through. It's not the right lens. I enjoy some of my, we're talking tutorials and there's like a reading we did, and the linguist who are reading, he's like, language is the only true thing we can rely on. And then I say to the linguistics professor, and they say, what do you think, Jason? I say, well, isn't it ironic that a linguistics professor is saying how great language is and how it's the most important thing? So, we get, academics have a sense of humor too. And you can say the sort of things you just said and they'll laugh at it. They're like, yep. And most academics I've spoken to are deeply aware of the, corruption, bias, ego.
Right.
Academics have. Yeah.
Okay, I've got four in the tube here for us to check out. From April, I've been sitting on this one for a while because I was waiting for the right time, and I figured might as well just answer it now. There are no Scientology-owned hotels in New York City. You have nothing to worry about. You could not possibly make a mistake in that regard. So you're safe, April. You're safe. Thank you. Let's see. We got one here. Linda Ford. Everyone has the right to not allow lecturers to read their paper months before writing a dissertation. Got to portray good arguments. Is this an incorrect use of the negative? Linda, is that what you meant to say? Does this make sense to you? Yeah,
I'm wondering if the not it was absent. Would it be?
All right.
Yeah, maybe she wants to ask again. Yeah,
that's okay. Sorry, Linda. Snow White. I have 2 degrees and I am a published academic. I think that Aaron has a fantastic laugh and makes excellent points.
Yeah. Academics get it. They don't think, some academics think they're special, but most academics understand it's a game and it's just a way of doing things, and that's okay.
You're crossing a line, Jason, and you know it.
No, hey, you said it first.
You're crossing a line, okay, buddy? Put your manners back in. Okay. Okay, robotic person. Aaron, the fact that you referenced Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris is evidence that university is needed. Yeah. I only mention them because it's the only time it's funny. I shouldn't have, because I was mentioning them for the negative. 3 goddamn hours arguing over the definition of truth. I'm just pointing out that usually to hear two, now Jordan Peterson was a professor. I don't think Sam Harris was actually a professor, right? He was a neuroscientist, but not a professor. Usually you, in order to hear two esteemed academics who love the smell of their own farts, you'd have to be in university to hear that kind of thing. I'm just saying now you can do it on YouTube. That's all I'm saying, you guys. That's all I'm saying. Okay. All right, let's see. Claire Alice says, Aaron, I agree, but not fully. University does have a purpose and expansion of knowledge. For example, I didn't know win-win existed. I thought the highest was compromise. It structures your brain, good and bad. So I guess I should correct the record. I do not think university doesn't have a purpose. I just think that the educational playing field has been leveled to a degree. It doesn't mean it's completely level. And it doesn't, but again, I'm speaking from such a point of bias because not only do I have the anti-formal education bias from my time in Scientology, but I then myself never went to college. So I almost don't have firsthand experience with the thing that I'm criticizing. And I'm not even sure I criticized it, to be fair. But the thing is, I don't even have a high school diploma. And I can tell you, I've never been in a room with a bunch of esteemed academics and felt inadequate. Now, maybe that's because I have a false sense of confidence. I don't know. All I'm saying is that I don't know what the hell I'm saying at this point. I definitely am not shitting on college. And I can tell you this, my oldest daughter is getting ready to start her first year of college. She's in one of these advanced programs where you do your last year of high school and your first year of college at the same time. And I've always told my girls, if you want to go to college, you're going to go because it's what you want. I don't want you to feel you should go because it's what you have to do, because that's just not true these days. You know what I'm saying? I wish I had gone to college, if only for the social aspect and the exposure to knowledge that you're never going to take the time. I would love to have a political science degree or a political history degree, or even a religious history degree, just to understand some of the most core fundamental elements at play in our society and to understand them at a depth that most people don't. I would have loved to have that opportunity just for fun, honestly.
It does, when you have to read papers that you wouldn't have otherwise read, like you pointed out, it does expose you to things that you would have gone, oh, I'm not going to read that. But then you have to for course, and then you have to discuss it. And that there is a utility to that.
Yes. Okay, Brian S. says, most only debate how many beers they can drink. Indeed. Okay, Sarah S. says, I have 2 master's degrees and 20 years teaching experience. I agree that learning has been democratized online. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. But there are some skills like research and rhetoric that require more than YouTube to develop. That's interesting. It's never occurred to me that that the skills gained in university, or one of the benefits to going, would be to try to gain those skills. That's actually, that's never even been on my radar. That's interesting. Do you agree with that statement?
I do, really. And you might notice that rhetoric's in there, and that's very well pointed out. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. Lena 1 says, off topic, are there no black ex-Scientologists? If so, why aren't they ever on these YouTube platforms? Thank you, Nora. I did look up Jesse. Yes, we have a whites only policy on SPTV. No, I'm just kidding. So honestly, Jesse Prince is probably the most high level, well-known black former Scientologist I'm aware of. Jesse, I've asked Jesse to come on and I have not heard back from him. I don't think it's Jesse has he sent me a lot of information to use in my videos. But whenever I have said, hey man, will you come on and chat with me? I've just never gotten a response. The only other black ex-Scientologist that instantly comes to mind is a man I was in the Sea Org with named Guillaume Hines. He has done some podcast interviews about his ex being an ex, but no longer being in Scientology. I would not describe Guillaume and I as friends, which is why I have not invited him on. Now, if Guillaume, and also I haven't heard from the guy in 15 years. So, but if Guillaume messaged me and said, hey man, I want to come on, I'd be like, in a heartbeat. I'm trying to think, one of the reasons there aren't a lot of black ex-Scientologists is because there are almost no black Scientologists to begin with. There's less than 2% black Scientologists, less. And so that's all. It's just a numbers thing, Lena. It's just a numbers thing. Let me see. KazriHekati.com. Jason not watching the channel before appearing on it live was a big gamble. Luckily, Aaron is a kind, inclusive, reasonable person. Oh, so
well, I watched a few videos very quickly, like skim through. Yeah, but I sort of regret that a bit because I feel like I came out firing in the wrong direction. That's all right.
That's right. Did you see my episode of Scientology in the Aftermath?
Do you mean the documentary you released last night?
No. On Leah Remini's TV show.
Oh, yeah. But I watched that when I first came out in 2018. So it's quite a long time ago. I don't remember the specifics of what your episode was about.
Okay. Did you see
I remember crying a lot.
Yeah. You and me both. You did see me on Lex Friedman.
That was the first time I really engaged with your content. Yeah.
So what's interesting is that even Lex Friedman was scolding me for not taking the basic concepts of Scientology seriously enough. And it seems like you might agree with him on that.
That's what I wanted to debate with you. So you said, your interview with Lex Friedman, I would take the first 20 minutes and take and deride you for, or chastise you for that exact point. And you did your funny laugh and you said to him, I grew up in a cult. I wouldn't know about
I said, I'm not familiar with the works of Plato because I grew up in a cult.
Right. And he then said to you, you can't keep using that excuse. But that was the first time you had said it on the podcast. So you must have said it to him off air beforehand.
We were bullshitting around for a long time beforehand.
Right. And if we could maybe have our first proper debate on this point of I grew up in a cult and I haven't read other books, because my understanding of Hubbard is he references other books. He references Gibbon's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. He references, I think it's called The Four Seasons of Manuela. It's a book he references in the first page of Responsibility of Leaders.
Manuela Science, yes.
Yeah, he talks about Will Durant's Story of Philosophy, which is a wonderful book for any Scientologist to read. And 1984, he talks a lot about Brave New World. So I don't get that statement that you grew up in a cult and therefore you don't know these things. And Plato, the Plato's allegory of the cave, man, that's like a 2-minute video on YouTube. Speaking of, like democratizing academia and stuff, that's like the easiest concept in the world to learn. Like it's not a hard one. And your answer to Lex should have been, no, it's not like that. To answer his question,
Jason, it is just a fucking joke.
Well,
it is literally just a running gag on this channel. If any smallest little thing that I screw up, I'd be like, what do I know, guys? I grew up in a cult. It's hilarious.
Oh, I see. Well, so as someone who hadn't watched your channel and who saw you on Lex, I thought that was your position. Like
it's literally a running joke on my channel.
But don't you think then that some people who haven't watched your channel, because Lex has a massive audience, would then watch that and go, "Oh, Scientologists don't read other books ever," and they're not allowed to? Because I hear
Jason, I was taken out of school at 12 years old to work full time for Scientology and never received an ounce of education about anything other than Scientology until I was 26 years old, other than the fact that I tend to be someone who voraciously consumes media of different kinds and books and audiobooks. I am for a guy that grew up in a cult, I would call myself above average educated.
Sure.
Not schooled, but educated, but only because I love learning about stuff. I can't tell you much about political history, but I could tell you more than most people who graduated high school, probably. So, but hold on. I guess where I was going with this is I was never expected to learn anything other than Scientology. And if anyone caught me trying to study some academic subject instead of doing my post or studying my Scientology studies, I would have been in trouble.
Mm.
Now, there's no rule in Scientology that, oh my God, you're not allowed to pick up that book. But it's a joke.
It's fine, but we go back to this statement that you want Scientologists to be able to come to your channel. You don't want to be a source of misinformation. There's this new word, disinformation, which is all fancy now. But you want to be giving it that fair hearing. And that's why, like, to me, it was the first time I had heard you, and it didn't seem like a joke. I didn't know so if it's an in-joke, sounds like it's an in-joke on your channel, but you're making it on Lex Friedman, a lot of his audience aren't going to get the in-joke, and I was one of those people. So I took that seriously. I was like, what do you mean you haven't read any other books? Like,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, look, I'm trying not to fall into a trap that I fall into, which is automatically getting defensive when it's not necessary. So your experience and how you took what I said is valid and true and real for you. And there's no point in me being, like, well, that's not who cares what I think? That's your experience. And that's a point well taken. Now, Lex edited the shit out of that interview. So I'm not quite sure if it was clear that I was laughing afterwards, that he was sort of laughing. He took a 4-hour chat and distilled it down to like 2 hours and 15 minutes.
I didn't know
it
that.
honestly really killed. Like, I still think it's a fantastically published interview, but it really killed the tone, the camaraderie, the jovialness that we had. I feel like Lex wants people to think he's much, much more serious than he actually is. Talking to him was just like talking to any friend, but the final edit made it seem like it was a little cold between us, when the truth is our chat was anything but that.
Right. Interesting.
And so when he said you can't keep using that as an excuse, he was kidding, but you can't necessarily tell with the way the video is edited.
Yeah. So, interesting. Fascinating. Yeah.
And obviously when I said, well, I don't know the works of Plato, Lex, because I grew up in a cult, I meant that punchline to land very much as a punchline, and it may not necessarily.
It didn't. Well, it didn't to me, but I'm perturbed to hear that was your upbringing. That sucks, man.
But I mean, I was on staff from the age of 12 to 26. I mean, were you just a public Scientologist for most of those your growing up developmental years?
I was in the SEAL from ages 15 to 16, and then I had a regular life again. I did some it's called TAFE in Australia. It's like a community college. I studied IT for a year and got a job. And I was in the SEAL for 3 years between the ages of 22 and 25, around the basics evolution time. And then the last thing, I was in the SEAL for like 2 months on the EPF when the whole thing blew up. So I also have split parents, and mum left staff when I was 10, and dad stayed on staff pretty much his entire life. So he's passed now. So I also had, like, mum just went on to like a very normal life. So I had years when I would go to a public normal school and read books, and then I would do the Scientology thing for a year. And then so like I had a very mixed bag upbringing. So if people said to me, Jason, did you grow up in a cult? I would say no, but I potentially work for one for a few years of my life, but I wouldn't say I grew up in a cult.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I just for shits and giggles, and I know my viewers probably wouldn't even enjoy it, but I would absolutely love to just do a stream with you at some point in the future where we go through the first 20 minutes of the chat, and you let me know what, from your perspective, would be a turnoff to a little doe-eyed Scientologist making their way, crossing that dangerous highway of anti-Scientology rhetoric. Honestly, I say that like I would have fun with that conversation, even if my viewers would probably just be having a go at you.
That's fine.
Are you really open to it?
Yeah. I'm like, it's hard to get to know me in like whatever an hour and a half of speaking or whatever, but I'm a very flippant, insouciant guy, and I don't mind like having fun like that. It's fine.
All
and
right.
I could tell you some interesting stories about me in the SEAL too, and like how, as far as describing me as sheeple, like I used to call the RTC rep by her first name, like that's the sort of guy I was, because I'm like authority, like, sorry, I seen you doing some dodgy stuff with the books, so I'm just going to call you by your first name now. So
which one?
Jenny Porter.
Jenny Porter. Hey, but you guys, did you guys have Ricky Jensen down there, or no? Was she in South Africa or Flag?
We had Ty Webb when I was 15, 16. And then we had Jenny Porter, and then she left, and there was a redhead girl came on just before I left.
Melanie Peeler?
I don't know her name. She had like Brave, the movie Brave, like bright red curly hair, like full on
short,
bright red curly.
Short?
I think it was. I don't think it was short.
It's got to be Melanie. Well, short. I mean like.
Yeah, I think. I don't remember. And then
it's gotta be.
when I came back this last time, in the new AO, because I've got a new AO in Sydney now. It was a guy, fuck, I don't even remember his name. He was a prick.
That's okay. Ty Webb, they better hide that guy in the back of a deep, dark cave, because if the FBI get their hands on him, Scientology's going. They better hide that guy, because
Why?
He is involved in some of the biggest financial crimes that would get Scientology's tax exempt status very likely taken away. So they better hide him in one of those Australian empty buildings or whatever.
Well, he's not there anymore.
Ty Webb's a real son of a bitch, man. That guy's famous in Scientology.
I know. I got that impression with him too.
Yeah.
He's an interesting guy.
Let's tackle. I keep stepping on your statements. I'm sorry. Okay. Kazri says, happy that the David Miscavige short jokes on this channel have diminished. Wait. You don't mean my life-size David Miscavige plush doll, do you? What? He'd be so cute if he wasn't such a destructive cult leader.
Okay, you're hilarious, Aaron. But it's a good point that she makes a good point. It's called ad hominem, as you probably know. It's attacking the person, not their ideas. Who cares how fucking tall he is? It's not relevant.
But you know who cares? He cares.
Okay. Hey, I have a story. So this is an interesting thing about Miscavige. I'll tell you this story. So I was in the Sea Org when the Melbourne Ideal Org opened. It was the first Ideal Org to open in Australia. So we're in the Sea Org in Sydney, and Melbourne's about 9 hours drive south, like a 1 or 2 hour flight. And so he came to the ANZO base in Sydney to see the base. I think it was the first time he'd ever come to Australia. And I was at the time in the galley doing food preps. And I was practicing myself all day, turning around, like putting the knife down and then turning around. I'm like, Jason, when he comes in the room, don't fucking turn around with a knife in your hand. That's not a good idea. Anyway, someone comes to me and says, hey, Jace, Amber, she's on reception. She was actually my ex-wife. I was married at the time to a girl, and it was her sister. So your sister-in-law's on reception, and she's starving. She's been waiting all day. We didn't know when Miscavige was going to arrive, so we wanted her. She was like the bubbly face, so they put her on. And can you go make her a sandwich? I'm like, yeah, all right, I'll go make her a sandwich. So I get my butter knife and my 2 pieces of bread, and the butter's in the mess hall. So I go into the mess hall just as the entourage is coming through the other side of the mess hall. So this is the first time I'd ever met David Miscavige. And I'm like, I stepped through the door, the swinging doors into the galley. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to, and I tried to take a step back, but I was like, no, they've already seen me. So across the hallway, they introduced me, and he comes up to me, and I'm just thinking, I am so fucked, because here it is. It looks like I'm trying to make myself a sandwich at 2:00 in the afternoon. And he comes up to me, and he can see I'm flustered, because I had it all prepped. I was like, I'm going to turn around with this cool salad I'm making, and he's going to think, what a cool salad you're making, Jace. Like, yeah, cool. Anyhow, so he comes up to me, and he looks at me, and he can see I'm flustered, and he goes, what time is it? And he goes, it's not lunchtime. And I'm like, and he goes, oh, it's your lunchtime because you're in the galley. You're cooking when they're eating. And I go, yes, sir. I'm just like, that'll do. I'll just take that as like, yes, I'm making my own lunch. But he was so nice to me, because I was scared, and he could have made it, like any local exec would have told me off for doing that, because
for bringing a sandwich to someone at reception because they skipped lunch.
No, for looking like I'm making a sandwich, because that's the sort of thing I would do.
Well, a real executive wouldn't care what you look like. They would care what you're actually doing.
Yeah, but whether they're real executives, so anyhow,
Okay.
My point is that when people talk shit on David Miscavige, it's like, to me, maybe he's like that in base and in
Jason,
America.
Your David Miscavige story is only remarkable that he didn't punch you in the face or send you to the RPF.
Right. That's my point, though. So, I don't deny what you guys are saying about him, and that's fine. I have no objection to it, but realize that it doesn't match my experience. So it's something.
Jason,
that
hold on. The lifeboat has an important question here. Was David Miscavige short with you?
Well, I'm 6'3", so yes.
Oh shit, big boy.
Yeah, but he seems tall to me, because when you that was at the height of my Scientology yes sir career. So to me, he was not God, but it was the president of the United States. You know, it was like someone really important coming up to you. So someone
Would
like
you
that,
say
even
he
if
was a? Would you say he was a big being?
fuck you.
A big
Yes, I
being
would,
with a
Aaron.
he's a big being with a tiny body, and there's nothing he can do about it. It's not his fault. It's okay.
You know what I would say? I had a friend. I have a friend who isn't a Scientologist, but he watched an event one time, and he said he's obviously very good at public speaking, and that's what I would say with Miscavige. Like he has a skill set, you know, like he's got a
He
skill
does
set.
have a skill set, but what people don't know is that he will spend 2 weeks practicing that speech. Is that what it means to be good at public speaking? I don't know. I go
don't
live.
know.
I do everything live. I don't practice this shit. I mean,
I think you'll find that most presidential speeches and Martin Luther King's speeches and all of those are pre-prepared, and people do practice their speeches.
Of course.
You know, whether he overdoes it, I don't know. And you know, the mealy mouthness of the speeches, I'm not voting for that. Like those, the therefores, grassroots, vanguard movements is exhausting.
All right, so we got 10 in the queue right here. White Umbrella says, totally agree with Aaron. I think it's beneficial to understand why people join and enjoy Scientology. It helps understanding and compassion. And I think that's what you're saying as well. Here's the thing. What I have found, and I did say this before, people who make public statements that I disagree with, when we talk in private, we always find common ground and actually agree with each other. Because I find it's the way people choose to discuss things publicly, or the way that people choose to discuss things publicly is so easily colored by who they think their audience is or what they're trying to accomplish with that audience. When if in a private setting, you're like, but this is what I meant when I said that. Oh, and this is what I meant when I said that. Oh, we meant the same thing. We just used different words, is usually how all that goes down. I can't promise it would go that way with Chris, but I'm just saying in almost every example I can think of where I was like, well, shit, I don't agree with that. When dealt with privately, we have always reached common ground. And not because one of us changed the other's minds, but because it was like, oh, this is what you meant. Yes, that's what I meant. Oh, okay. What, you know what I'm saying?
I feel like everything we've said would fall into that category. I don't think we've found a true point of opposition here at all, really.
Yes.
I think we're just slightly different perspectives. But can I say, just because that last one sort of piqued my curiosity. So you asked before about like, or I gave you this example of like a linguistic analysis of HOB clearing words. And then someone just mentioned there about like, you know, to help people with potentially what might get you trapped in Scientology in the first place, like what those pitfalls might be. So from like a critical thinking analysis of, let's say, like Scientology's belief in past lives or Scientology's belief that the therapy makes you better, there's a critical thinking error called, or fallacy called confirming the consequent. And it's basically when you say something like, if it's raining outside, I'll wear my raincoat. And then you wear your raincoat and someone says, oh, well, then it must be raining outside. But you could have put your raincoat on for other reasons. And what I want to illustrate here is Hubbard says, like, well, you know, the transition to the acceptance of past lives that happens in like 1951, he's saying, well, we accept it because when you stop someone in therapy, therefore the therapy doesn't go any further. So we have to accept the past lives. So what he's doing is confirming the consequent. He's saying, oh, well, therefore past lives exist. But actually he hasn't proven past lives there in the slightest. And that's the sort of commentary I would do. It doesn't disprove that he has found an access to past lives, but it also doesn't prove it. So the sort of book I would write would point out things like that. And then you could give it to someone who's thinking about getting into Scientology. And then if they got into it and then they have this past life experience, they might have the tools to go, wow, I've just had this experience. That's great. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's a past life experience. It also doesn't necessarily mean that if I feel better, that it was the therapy that made me feel better. So there's little nuances like that. That's the sort of approach that hopefully answers one of the earlier questions.
That makes sense. Okay, what's worse, Hillsong or Scientology? I live 2 minutes from on in Sydney. They are borders on celebrity. What does this mean? Is this?
Don't know what the last sentence means, but
so I do not know. I haven't seen any of the documentaries or movies or articles about Hillsong, so I can't even comment on it. I live 2 minutes from
One
Is
of them in
ON?
Sydney.
Oh, from one in Sydney. They are borders on celebrity cult. I'm sorry,
Cult,
Prince
maybe?
Muskie. I'm sorry. I just I don't know exactly what you're saying, so I'm going to move on to the next one. Pieces of me. You can still do it, AA Ron. I was 55 when I got my degree, and school was a great time. Yes, the truth is, as in my professional life, I've been exceedingly successful. So other than pure fascination and like I just don't have a personal reason to spend years doing advanced education at this point. It wouldn't set me up to do. I'm not saying I wouldn't benefit from it, but most people who engage on a line of formal education are doing it so that they can then pursue some sort of a professional pursue some professional course in that field. Like I wouldn't spend time going to law school to be a lawyer right now, because I doubt most lawyers do as well professionally as I do in my professional life. There'd be no reason for me to switch careers at this point. Whether we're talking about, anyway, we don't have to talk about it. Okay. So, but thank you, pieces of me. Thank you, pieces of me. Tyrone Smith, Aaron, you beast. Aaron versus Jason. I have to say, Jason has better hair, and he probably never tossed people through walls. Yes, Scientology likes to talk about me throwing people through walls. Seriously, I appreciate the difference here. You both are great. Thank you. Thank you, Tyrone.
Thank you. I think I'm starting to understand now the insouciance that comes with your channel. I just didn't know. I didn't know that coming in. It's great. I like it.
All right. Ghost Guy says the premise of the book Among the Scientologists is flawed from the jump. They are taught to lie and obscure as much as possible, and every interview was probably written and approved by David Miscavige and Osa. And I have to agree with this statement. But maybe a true academic would go, yes, I totally agree, and that's what makes this work even more fascinating. What's your take on it?
Exactly that. The academic isn't claiming, well, my only objection to the book is it should be called Among the Winning Scientologists, or Among the Eminent Scientologists, or Among the Pre-Select Scientologists. But
yes, among the approved Scientologists. Yeah,
that is its problem. He does seem to think he's representing all of Scientology. And I read this book when I was still half a Scientologist, and he does do interviews with people, and one of the questions he does ask them is about David Miscavige, and they're all like, he's amazing. And I'm like, I don't know any Scientologists like that. Maybe that's just an Australian thing, but I've spoken to Scientologists. Some of them still speak to me, and they have serious qualms about the way things are going. So yes, he does, this academic Donald A. Westbrook does overreach. However, it is completely acceptable, and I think beneficial, to have that viewpoint in an academic work. Like, what's wrong with saying, what do the hardcore Scientologists think? What is their perspective? It's allowed, as long as, I'll just finish here. Other academics have responded to this work, as academics do, and they pretty much one for one say that book needs to be read in concert with the other work on Scientology and Scientologists. And that's the important thing.
I think that's fair, because if I were an academic and I was faced with an organization like Scientology, it's almost an insurmountable problem. It's like, well, okay, if the only people I'm ever going to be allowed to talk to are people who are, and just to use some, spicy words, controlled, brainwashed, programmed, will lie at all costs, then where do you even start? I guess you would have to start with at least those and recognize that that's who you're likely dealing with. Do you feel that academic even acknowledged that fact in that book?
He does. He literally does. He says that he understands that he reached out to OSA. The first people he were fed were OSA approved people. And then he says, in a snowball fashion, he acquired other interviews. So he did the Purifin SRD as part of this research. So he properly did. Yeah, he did Scientology.
Well, he did what he thinks was the SRD. Do you have reason to believe he was put through the full SRD?
I would have no idea. No.
Because that someone approaching Scientology for purely critical reasons to see if it works and approaching with an open mind aren't even allowed to participate.
Yeah. So he actually told them that he earnestly wants. So he's like a diehard religious scholar, and he honestly wanted to undergo and experience that. So he actually convinced Osa that no, he's not trying to sit in judgment. He honestly wants to apply himself and experience this stuff.
Because I haven't read that book, I just don't know. Does he say how many hundreds of hours he spent receiving?
Oh, actually, I think he does, but I'd have to find it. I can maybe find it and send it to you on Twitter.
If it was anything less than hundreds, then he was walked through some bullshit version of the objectives.
And that, honestly could have been the case. But
That's
where
fine.
where he falls off is then he, having acknowledged the snowball fashion, he then sort of goes, so it could be that the Scientologists I'm speaking to are just the onboard Scientologists. So having said that, here's my thesis, which is a little bit like, anyway.
All right, fine. I mean, any study, and actually, but this is the crux of academia. Studies are meant to be criticized. They're meant to be duplicated. They're meant to be falsified. It's what they're there for. So I guess I shouldn't be too hard on a guy for putting out what might be a shit study. It's like, but okay, but that's what other academics are there for, is to call it a shit study. Anyway, I'm taking a little too much liberty with it. I honestly wouldn't. I feel like I would never bother to take the time to study a book that some academic wrote out of some little sort of dilettantish interest in Scientology, because I'm like, thanks, bro. We didn't need we didn't need your memo. We know what we're talking about.
Tony Ortega did a blog post when it came out and said academic tells us what we already knew, and that's a fair comment from Tony.
Okay.
But there's been another guy who did another doctorate in 2019, like a year after this, I think it was. Thomas Aylett or something like that, and he did a study on independent Scientology. So he went and spoke to Ron Zorg and all the different people, and he tried to talk to the Church of Scientology as well. But he said basically once they found out he was also speaking to these independent guys, they were like, "Whoop, nope, we don't want anything to do with you." So that's a different perspective. Yeah.
Now that's interesting because you would get a fair shake and honest answers from the independent guys.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Joni Cummings says, Aaron and Jason, the both of you are hilarious. Jason, what's the strangest thing to you that you have found since you left Scientology?
Well, because I lived a sort of normal life in between my stints in the church. Like I have a Queen Scout Award, which is what would be called the King Scout Award now because we have a king, but it's the same as your Eagle Scout. Like I went to Scouts, like I did camps, and like I had my first girlfriend at 15 and 14 and lost my virginity at 16. Like I did normal things that
damn, bro.
I drank alcohol when I was 15 and kind of like a normal stuff. I listened to Iggy Pop and Monster Man.
Careful what you admit to. Scientology is going to put all this on your hate site.
That's fine. I would love one of those sites because from what I can see, they're like great promotion because they're so funny. But yeah, so coming out for me wasn't it was an internal shock in terms of my worldview, like my internal philosophy, religious view, but like it wasn't like I was cloistered, like I already had guitars and hi-fis and had.
Are your parents out?
So my dad passed in 2014, a few years before I left, and he was real gung-ho, and he probably was the biggest pull on me staying in Scientology, and the reason I was there in the first place because I'd always had ups and downs in the church, and I probably would have just walked off when I was a kid. So he passed, and then Mum is still alive, and she walked away when Golden Age of Tech 1 came out. She was an auditor, and they did the like, you've got to. I was 9 or 10, and they're like, you've got to do 25 hours in the chair. She was a staff member, 25 hours in the chair, plus retrain, plus look after me. And she had my half sister. She would have been 3 at the time, 3 or 4. Yeah, so she sort of moved on, and she's comfortable with what I'm doing. She's not on board. She sort of wishes I would just move on from it like her and get on with life. But she's not against what I'm doing, and she understands my perspective as well.
Uh-oh, that's my 2-hour battery going out. Give me 1 sec.
Yeah.
I'm like, I move as fast as a Formula One pit crew over here. Okay, so that's interesting. Rural SD Lawyer says, it's hard for me to understand how Jason believes he knows how people coming out might look at your chat more than you would know or more than other people on SPTV. That's interesting.
It's not mutually exclusive. Sorry to jump in.
True. It's not mutually exclusive. We might both have the same knowledge of how people would look at it and just care about it to different degrees. Would you say that could be true? You could be still more sensitive to, like, I might go, yeah, that would piss someone off, but I just don't care anymore. Where you're like, yeah, that would piss someone off, but so I would do it differently. I don't know.
Part of my personality, I've noticed just in life in general, is I like being a contrarian and I like doing things that other people aren't doing. So we have to question, to what degree am I taking this path just because I think no one else is. And I reckon if you guys didn't exist and Leah and Mike and no one had done anything, I reckon I'd be doing exactly what you're doing. It's that you're already doing it. I'm like, well, someone's already doing that. Like, what do I need to add to the pile for? I'll just do something else. So yeah,
I actually love that.
Yeah.
I actually love that. Okay, John says the vast majority of Scientology kids I know never graduated high school and none went to college. It's very true.
Yeah, the second generation Scientology thing, man, it's an issue.
I mean, shit, you're going to college now. You're in your third year. How old are you?
36.
So I'm
about to turn 37.
So how come you didn't go to university when you were in Scientology?
I actually had the opportunity when I was going to the community college when I was studying IT. I was living with my nan at the time in Adelaide, and I had done a couple years of the IT at TAFE, and my best friend in Adelaide was going to university. He has a degree in computer science and pure mathematics and electrical engineering, so he's like really switched on in that way, and both him and my nan encouraged me to go to university, and I went along to a university to the information sessions, and I was about to start, but what happened was I was 17 and I got a job at that time and I started making money, and I just got a bit excited and I was like, yeah, I just like making money. So I ditched the community college. I never finished the IT and I just walked away from it. I got into sales and making money, and yeah, I look at it now. So yeah, I could have been a second generation Scientologist with a university degree, but it just wasn't. I wasn't particularly involved in the org at that time. It wasn't the org who tried to stop me or anyone who tried to stop me.
Interesting.
My dad,
all right.
My dad tried to stop me joining the Army Reserves. That he tried to stop me because I was in the Scouts, and when you finish the Scouts, it's kind of like, well, do Army Reserve or something. But of course, without war crime and insanity. So
yeah. So your dad. I mean, actually, we spoke about this a couple of days ago.
I heard.
But you would confirm that your Scientologist father was like not keen on you joining the military for Scientology reasons.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know any Scientologists who have been or are actively interested in military service. I do know one who's a policeman. He was a good friend of mine. And I think police is acceptable, but military is, I think it's what you already said on your channel. It's like, brainwashing and psych drugs and all that sort of stuff and war. And we don't want anything to do with that.
Do you agree on the rank hypocrisy of Scientology touting L. Ron Hubbard's Navy service around as something clout-worthy, but practically barring any of its own members from participating in the military?
Yeah, I do. And I think that there's also stupidity in regards to, when people like you who were actively sort of never given the chance to get an external education or investigate these other fields of discipline, because it's like, well, Hubbard did all those things. Why aren't I allowed to go study psychology or something like that? But having said that, so my wife's father, so my father-in-law, who's will not talk to me now because I'm declared. He's like, he even cut Anne off and she's not even declared, although she must be on some sort of half declare list. When I was first going to university, I changed my major a few times. I bounced around, and I at one point wanted to change into the psychology major, and I spoke to him about it. I'm like, is that okay? This is when I was half a Scientologist still. And he's like, yeah, of course, you can study psychology. No disagreement. So and he is like a diehard Scientologist. So that's a diehard Scientologist saying, yeah, go ahead and study psychology, no problem. So I think it really comes down to the person and their perspective. Now,
well, someone's Scientology experience is going to come down person to person, but it doesn't change what Scientology says.
Are you talking about the Church of Scientology, official?
There is no Scientologist on this earth who would differentiate between Scientology and the official Church of Scientology.
Well, your independent Scientologists are doing exactly that.
There is no Scientologist who is in good standing with the Church of Scientology who would agree that you can make a distinction between Scientology and the Church of Scientology.
I disagree. I think, and maybe this comes down to the Australian culture and the people I hang out with, being a contrarian myself, and I knew other contrarians. But no, I think when people privately say things about church management and so forth, they are saying, like, I make a distinction between my faith or philosophy or religion, or however you want to classify that, and church and church management, church policies, and so on.
No, I mean that they would say the only true and correct, they would say that the only true and correct technology and application of the technology exists within the official Church of Scientology, and that it's not possible for it to exist outside of it.
Yeah, that I would tend to agree with. And that was what came between me and my father-in-law in the end when I was going through my thing. I was like, I'm totally fine with you being a Scientologist. In fact, I don't like when people put up success stories of Scientologists and pull them apart and go, oh, this is rubbish. And like, if they're having a good time of it, who cares? Let them go for it. Like, if they're saying, I feel great. Like if someone comes to me and says, I'm a born again Christian and I just felt God come into my life, I'm like, great, no judgment. Like, I don't have a problem with that. And I don't like when people pick on Scientologists for things like that. But yes, ultimately, to your point, yes, it does seem that the diehard Scientologists cannot, because Hubbard wrote it it's a high crime, right? Like, what is it? Seeking to splinter off a group, or to protect it from its higher officers. It's like in quotes, right? So it's like Hubbard's explicit wish is that it stays hegemonic, if you will, and monolithic.
Right.
But I can tell you, I mean, maybe your audience isn't too interested, but I was fascinated. I listened to a lecture series called are you familiar with the Great Courses? It's a website, but it's also, you can get it via Amazon Prime. And it's university lecturers doing public audience lectures, like actual tenured academics doing lectures on. So I listened to one on, the history of Western civilization and the economic history of the world. And like, because sometimes at uni, I do feel like what they're telling me is a little bit too woke, shall we say? I don't like using that word, but we'll just say it's woke. So I get this other education from that resource. And I listened to one called Sacred Texts of the World. And this guy goes through all the different religions. And I'll tell you this story very quickly, and hopefully it's not too boring, but I've started to look at Scientology long term. And what I mean by that is when people say like, oh, Scientology is going to disappear, they're wrong. That's not how this works.
I've never heard anybody say that.
Yeah, I've seen it on a blog somewhere a couple times. I don't know. I don't recall when. This is a few years ago. But, it might disappear and, be subdued or come in different forms. But I'm going to tell this story and actually just tell me what you think about this. So, and we're going to get a little bit academic here. So in the 1st century BC, there were 3 main philosophical groups of Judaism. One was the Essenes, and the Essenes took the text of Judaism to be like literal, like aesthetic, like, they were the ones who they lived in the desert and they were like hermits, and they're like, this is perfect. And that, and you might think of them like the Sea Org, actually. They're like complete literal interpretation and so on. And they were the ones who actually incidentally gave us the Dead Sea Scrolls. The second group was the Sadducees. And the Sadducees were the ones who ran the temple. And they were the ones who had the connections to the Roman Empire and the Roman authorities. And they were also corrupt, because when you have that sort of money and power in the temple, you have corruption and so on. The third group were the Pharisees. And the Pharisees had rabbis. The other 2 groups didn't have rabbis. And if you know anything about the Jewish tradition, they have in their, I always forget if it's the Torah or the Talmud, but they have like the original, like early Bible. It's called the Pentateuch. It's like the first 5 books of the Bible, and it's like that's the actual scripture. But then they have the other one, which is the Gemara and the Mishnah or something, where they actually have rabbis comment on the earlier text, and they have it published in that sacred text. They have dissenting rabbis interpreting the text differently to how traditional Jews see the text. Now, what happened is in I think it was 70 CE, the Romans came in and wiped out the temple, wiped out the Sadducees, and went and killed the Essenes in the desert. And the ones who survived were the Pharisees with their rabbis. And today we have rabbinical Judaism. It is from the Pharisee tradition, and it's wiped out these other forms of it. Now, why am I saying all this? Well, maybe in 1,000 years' time, if there's humans around then, let's hope there are, or in 500 years' time or 100 years' time, you might find a very different version of Scientology. Imagine a Scientology where you could interpret the text, for example. Like, that would just be groundbreaking, wouldn't it? And, you know, one thing I'm interested in exploring is, because whatever I do, it's not going to be about the Church of Scientology or David Miscavige or even Owen Hubbard. It'll be a textual analysis of the text. So it might be the basics, the congresses, a specific error or something like that. Could you imagine a Scientology that is like that? Could you imagine that it could just be very different?
I choose to believe that the early days of Scientology in the 50s and the 60s, it was a bit more like that, which is actually one of the things that helped it prosper, is that it was okay to chew on it and talk about it and think about it and sort of make it your own. People sort of did that. And you had little kind of Scientology opinion leaders popping up in different areas that would be like and eventually Miscavige and L. Ron Hubbard just thought these people were amassing too much power and they just didn't like it. And they crushed all of that.
That's right. But, you know, Hubbard's not here and Miscavige is what, 60, 70? I don't know how old he is, but
60 something.
Okay. So 20 or 30 years, he won't be here. Who takes over next? Now, I have a feeling it's going to be worse, because I have a feeling the only person who will take over next is going to be someone who's trained by him, and it'll be an even worse rendition. That's my prediction. But maybe it's not. And, you know, maybe it comes out differently. I don't know. I'm not trying to save Scientology.
Jason, just because since we're talking about a little bit of historical stuff,
Yeah.
by the way, I wouldn't know anything about any of that because I grew up in a cult. But but you know, L. Ron Hubbard himself, though, changed the nature of what Scientology would become when he came out with the ethics codes and the lower ethics conditions and keeping Scientology working, where he basically said everything comes down to what I say, and it must be taken literally, and no one else has ever contributed anything of value to Scientology. If you recall, he shit on the concept of democracy itself in that policy letter. And he said, we will not question how I came to rise above the bank. So he set his word in stone. You know, he set his word in stone as unquestionable law, and he set himself up as the sole source of anything. And I guess my point here is that it's not just the passage of time that changed what Scientology was or its complexion. It was L. Ron Hubbard himself changing what he wanted Scientology to be.
Yes. So, you know, in my thought experiment, how much of Jesus do you really think is in the Bible? You know, like the book of Matthew and you know, Isaiah, and I forgot them off the top of my head. But, you know, those books were written, this is from the Sacred Text of the World course. It was like, I think the first one was written like 90 years afterwards. So we're talking hearsay. And Christianity, one thing I can say from a linguistics perspective is language change is going to happen. And when the Church of Scientology thinks it's going to, you know, when Hubbard says, like, in keeping Scientology working, you know, what I say here is going to remain true and blah, blah, blah. At one point in our society, that KSW was going to be like Latin. That's what happened in the Christian church. Enough centuries had passed that the books were now in Latin. So then you had a King James Bible come out, which is a very different book than the earlier stuff. So it might seem like I could never imagine a Scientology where they get rid of Hubbard. That's not what I'm saying. But I can imagine a Scientology where they have reimagined Hubbard, for better or for worse. And
for sure.
Nothing
stays the same forever. I mean, even David Miscavige has changed many of Hubbard's things. So whoever comes next will continue to do so. Imagine
if you had, I say this thought experiment. Imagine if at the front of every course was personal integrity instead of KSW.
Oh,
just
my
imagine
God.
What a difference, right? You know, there's a reference in the new Hubbard Qualified Scientologist pack, which is like, says that, like, it's how to study Scientology. And it's like saying, like, don't just believe it because we're telling you, just try it out, see if it works for you. Like, imagine just that as like a different perspective. And imagine a situation where, You know, I remember in the CEO querying, like, why do I have to call people sir? Like, I know it says officers, but just because you're the CEO of something or some department or div head, there's no reference that says I have to call you sir. But like, oh, you've got to call them sir, you know?
Let me throw this out there. Let me know what you think about this. I could give a dozen ways that Scientology could be improved and Miscavige could improve it. And if I were Miscavige, I would do those things. But I would also say, why would I want Scientology to be improved when what they're selling everyone is a fucking lie? Why would I want it to be a kinder, gentler version of Scientology? Why? So people get more easily entrapped?
Are you talking about when it's a lie, the OT3 stuff and the OT material, or what's the lie?
The promise
like
of the promise of the bridge is freeing yourself from the eternal cycle of birth and death, freeing yourself from the trap of the physical universe, and freeing yourself from being trapped in these bodies, regaining the ability to fully causatively exteriorize at will with full perception, the ability to skip the between lives implant stations, and to regain your eternal spiritual freedom. This is all the massive pile of horse shit. Now, someone can argue, but that's not what they're promising you on the lower half of the bridge. And you go, the lower half of the lower half of the bridge only exists to get you to the upper half of the bridge.
I have a return question before I answer your question. Do you think Christianity is bullshit and Islam is bullshit and yes. Buddhism and Hindu is all bullshit?
Yes.
All religions bullshit?
Yes.
I don't.
It doesn't mean I don't think there's value in them, but I just happen to think it's all bullshit. But it doesn't mean you can't have. Now, of course, we have to define what do you mean by bullshit.
No, I get what you're saying, Dan. Would you describe yourself?
I think religion has value in societal groups. I still don't. I'm still comfortable saying I personally don't believe in what religion sells. That's what I'm saying.
So for me, I'm very interested in religion, but I don't want to ever join a religion. So that's sort of my take on it. And I'm becoming aware through my university studies. You know, when people go like, oh, religion's rubbish and science is everything, it's like, are you aware that the scientific method was developed in the Judeo-Christian ethos of the 16th and 17th century in Western Europe? There are other societies that have had all the reasons and precursors to developing the scientific method, and none of them did. And there are arguments that religion, specifically Judeo-Christian religion, is why we have science as we have it today. So it's, for me, I'm not trying to sell anyone religion. I'm not trying to sell anyone Scientology. But I do think it's interesting and it's fascinating. And hey, we live in the West and we might like to think that religion is on the down. It's not. The majority of human beings belong to a religion, and deeply too. Like, this is, in America and Australia.
Those are not mutually exclusive, though. You can still have a majority of believers and it can still be on a downtrend.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's actually not on a downturn. No, it's up from what I understand. Okay. I was taught.
I don't know. Did you know that 80% of statistics are actually made up on the spot?
Yes. I was taught in Sociology 101, like when COVID happened, for example, religious attendance in Australia skyrocketed, for example. Okay. Now, but you mentioned but what about Scientology specifically? Like, well, then why potentially promote Scientology? Because the nature of my work could be walking that line, couldn't it? Because I would be coming at it from a neutral standpoint. Someone might read it and go, oh, actually, I want to check this out. Here's something I find interesting about Scientology from a philosophical religious perspective. If you take the Abrahamic faiths, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they all believe in an external God, a theistic God, and you are sort of subservient to that God. There are lots of interpretations there, and I'm sure some people, that's not really what it's about. But, I feel at base, you've got this external being who's better than you, and you have to answer to. Then you've got Buddhism and Hinduism and Sikhism and other similar faiths, and their end goal is actually the dissolution of self. So you can.
I gotta be honest, Jason. You're losing me, so I'm guessing you're losing the audience.
I'm sorry. I'll get there very quickly.
Okay.
Scientology offers a perspective that's not any of those. So at base, even if you were to shave off 90% of it, I do find it interesting from an academic. It just interests me. Like there's a guy here who's saying a different metaphysical view, and I understand maybe audience don't care for that sort of thing, but it interests me. That's interesting to me. Not saying it's right, but it just interests me.
Okay. All right. Tassie Devil. Does Jason know that Osa is watching and reporting on this video?
Sure, but who are they reporting to?
They're seniors.
Oh yeah, no. I mean,
the editors for the hate website they're going to put up on you.
I don't know if they would put up. I mean,
I know they're not going to. I'm just answering.
For me, it'll be interesting if they do put up a hate website because
they're not going to.
No,
not
but
unless
it
you
would
appear on a TV show.
But even if I was to, like, it would, I think, to me, make them look like to some degree, you could understand to some degree why they would put a hate website up on someone like Leah. I'm not saying they should or it's right, but if Leah's attacking them and they're attacking, it's like a two-sided battle. But with me, I'm not doing that. So it would be funny if they did, because what they would be demonstrating is not only can you not attack the Church of Scientology, you can't even just do academic discourse on it. That's unacceptable. And that to me would be like, okay, you're making your own bed there. I think they would be hurting themselves far more than they'll be hurting me if they were to do that.
That's okay. They've declared nice, old, beautiful mothers and forced them to disconnect from their children over things like saying a critical word of David Miscavige. So, I mean,
right, okay.
Declaring an academic would not lower their social standing.
I am declared. I'm
putting up a hate website on someone who just wanted to do a academic study.
I have a question for you, Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about this disconnection thing? Because it seems to me that you've got these sources of trouble, A to J, and the first one is you're connected to a person intimately, like family or whatever, who's been declared suppressive. So for me, is not the church policy actually not to separate families? I'm not saying they follow it. They do it all the time. I'm not saying they don't do it. But isn't the actual policy to not do that and to
no? It's to weigh. It's to weigh which one will cause more trouble. Disconnecting or not disconnecting. That's what they're supposed to do. It's meaning their policy isn't to not do it. It says do not allow the person to disconnect if it will cause sparks to fly and create even more antagonism.
Mm-hmm.
Usually in most places in Scientology where disconnection is described, it's described in a way where it doesn't seem like you're talking about your family. You're talking about your angry landlord or your neighbor who hates everyone or your boss or your whatever. He usually doesn't talk about disconnection in a framework of mother, father, spouse, or children. And I think we can say without a doubt, well, actually, we've been talking to a lot of people from even the earliest days of Scientology. Disconnection is enforced today differently than it used to be. And they certainly don't take into consideration will this cause sparks to fly? They seem to not care about that at all. So, but type A to J, I mean, type A just means once they declare you type A, which means you have a member of your close personal family who is antagonistic to Scientology. Once they declare you that, you're not eligible for Scientology auditing until you either fix that person or disconnect from them. So just having a type A doesn't mean they don't support disconnection.
Yes, but it's again, it's a more nuanced perspective, isn't it? Because then then it comes down to the church saying, this is their claim, or we don't actually disconnect families. If the family member chooses to do that, that's on them. But when I got declared, OSA called my wife's parents to get my wife to come into the org and read all the bad stuff about Jason so that she could disconnect from me and take the kids, which is like.
So then why do you take why do you take the other position then?
Because I'm doing a textual analysis and I'm curious, what does the text say? Not what does the church say.
That makes it seem like but do you understand that the texts of Scientology contradicts itself to a degree that you cannot blame, like, so you're saying that the texts of Scientology did not support what Scientology did to you?
No, I was asking you a question. I would like, so you know, I have deliberately stayed away from reading Scientology as much as possible. I just want to do my studies. And then I'm going to turn around when I'm done and come back to it and then analyze it, because I feel like that would be a good way to put some distance between me and it, and then and analyze it. So I have questions at the moment. It was a question of what do you read? I'm just saying what I remember about it was like it seems to indicate that it's not as simple as
the solution when anyone is identified as a source of suppression is to A, handle. If handle doesn't work, B, disconnect.
Yeah.
So in your case, they would say, well, we couldn't handle Jason, so now everyone has to disconnect from him. Right.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm not. It's going to be hard for some people to separate what I do from the church when I say, oh, the church, the texts say this, and they're going to go, but that's not what I experienced, and they're right. So it's okay. I'm glad we're having this talk because it tells me I really need to point that out in any papers I write. It's like, this is not about the Church of Scientology or anyone's experiences. This is just a textual analysis.
Interesting. Okay. Lulu92 says, I'm sure some people had great experiences with Jim Jones, but he is still responsible for the deaths of over 900 people in the cult. Certainly true. But what's interesting is that if you see a documentary about Jim Jones and the People's Temple, and it leaves you with a question of how could anybody be so stupid and crazy so as to have joined the People's Temple, then that documentary did not do a good job of telling the story about what it is about the People's Temple that made it so successful in recruiting people. Because, by the way, I've read 2 of the most recent books on Jim Jones and the People's Temple, and this is going to sound absolutely crazy, especially considering how the People's Temple ended. In the early days of the People's Temple, when they were building up and recruiting in the San Francisco area, they were able to accomplish and gain for themselves some prestige and influence that David Miscavige could only wish for. The People's Temple, in some ways, as an organization, and in that limited time before they made the move, as an organization, not as a belief system, not as a cult or whatever, accomplished certain things societally that benefited the people who joined. And in order to tell the story of Jim Jones and the People's Temple, you have to tell that part of the story as well. Otherwise, you just think that you have to be a stupid, degenerate, crazy person to join a cult. Nobody thinks they're joining a cult.
Yeah, that's really important. That's exactly right. And maybe that's how some people can understand where I'm coming from, is a book like that could explain it. Help.
So and I feel like Lulu's probably responding to some of the earlier things that I said, where it's actually important to help people understand what is it at the lower levels that get people sort of hooked to Scientology. In the gym, using the Jim Jones analogy, you'd never catch me talking about the People's Temple in a way that was like, but have we examined the good parts of Jim Jones? I just think this story would need to be told in a way where people can understand how he got people to join in the beginning, so they understand there's very effective methods that are used. It's not like, anyway, I don't want to be too long-winded about it. I feel like I was pretty clear when I said it in the first place. But
do you get that? And hopefully the audience are getting that from me. Like, I'm not saying I'm going to be writing a book that's saying what are the good parts of Scientology. I'm just going to say, here's idea A from Hubbard at the earlier levels, and let's philosophically analyze it. That's all I'm saying.
Are you going to very much try to not just examine some good thing he wrote in some policy in isolation, but to examine how the policy has evolved over time? Because L. Ron Hubbard wrote a lot of great things that sound great on paper. You mentioned one, the article on personal integrity. There's one thing a Scientologist is not allowed to actually exercise, and that is any of the freedoms outlined in that personal integrity article.
Well, when it comes to Scientology, that's for sure. Yeah, it's like personal.
That's what I mean. But somebody could do it. Somebody could do an article on that paper and be like, "This is the greatest thing anyone's ever written." You're like, "Well, yeah, but he contradicted every part of it."
So, in Scientology, I think your audience are probably familiar with that. You've got 3,000 public lectures, 18 books, 3 encyclopedic volumes. There's a lot of text to analyze, and there's no way I would do it all. So I'm going to have to make a choice to choose a specific era, theme, or type of material. So whatever I then choose it'll be interesting. I'll have to speak to my supervisor at the time. It's like, but if I know that he writes something against that later on, can I still include that? And it might be like, no, you've got to stick to just that. But I will, whatever my constraints are, I do want to try and show the tone and the flavor. And yes, you need more than, because sometimes someone can say things that there's never a smoking gun, but when you connect all the dots, it's there. So yeah, it would be important that I'm allowed to include that if that's the case.
Okay. I mean, I think the endeavor that you're on is interesting, even if only because you find it interesting. I think a cynic would be like, yeah, but what's the point? Hey, if the point is you want to do it, that's a good enough point for anybody. Like, who cares, right?
Yeah, I do want to do it. I'm going to bring in the Holocaust here. So academics study the Holocaust, right? It's not to prove that it was the worst thing in the world or the best thing in the world. It's just to understand the forces at play. And one of the interesting things, if you read a book like Man's Search for Meaning by a psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, which was the first book I read by a psychiatrist, and it was so scary to do that at the time. But, he points out, and others have pointed out as well, that it's the capos, the Jewish guards, who were the worst to most of the Jewish prisoners. And that's an interesting insight. That's something that wouldn't have been known if academics and other writers didn't get in there and discuss it. And that, I think, is important. So that's sort of how I take it with Scientology. It's like you might find some things come out of my thesis that, hopefully thesis to be, that it's just a different perspective that no one's thought of before.
All right. Interesting. Destiny Salazar, doesn't saying that wasn't my experience dismiss the acknowledgement of many people's testimonies? I don't think so, by the way. Just because it didn't happen to you doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I don't think when someone says that wasn't my experience, they're denying it was someone else's experience.
Yeah, I'm not denying anyone's experiences.
Yeah. I think it's actually very important to know that some experiences are not universal, and that does not deny the validity of the experience that was not shared by everyone. That's okay.
And more than that, to turn that on its head, that comment sort of seems to suggest to me that because other people have had a certain experience, then I'm not allowed my experience. It's like, well, I had my experience with David Miscavige and in the church, and I'm not as bitter about it. I'm really only bitter about the last little incident that happened.
It's interesting because I'll say Miscavige has never yelled at me or hit me, but that's because I didn't work with him.
Right. Yeah. And I don't deny, like, as I said before, I'm not saying he didn't do those things. If you guys are saying he did those things, he did. Like, what possible reason would however many people, 30 people, 40, come out and say those things? Like, what? They're all getting together in some private room saying, hey, we're going to make up a lie. Like, it's not what's happened.
Okay. There does seem to be okay, well, it just says Miss Kim. I love academic debate, but I get an underlying sense from Jason that he's dismissing those with horrible experiences because his wasn't that bad. No? Yes, no, maybe so.
No, I repeat what I just said. I'm not. I watched your documentary about Serge Obletsky last night and I bawled my fucking eyes out. It's like, it's horrible. I'm not saying that. It's just that we don't all. One thing that used to bother me being in the Church of Scientology, which came later in the years, but when the ideologue started coming out, and then later on the gross book sales, and then IS fundraising, everyone's on this today. Everyone's on this today, and it's like, no, I'm happy to do my own thing, and because I don't have a horrendous story, I don't feel like I can make a meaningful contribution. I can tell you my story, and there is a horrendous aspect to it, but by comparison, it's not horrible. And so I'm like, well, how can I contribute to the conversation? In no way does that mean that I am denying anyone else's experiences. I utterly reject that.
Fair. I think that's fair. Pete Jensen makes one of the deepest observations of the evening. Jason said David Miscavige is 6 inches soft. Confirmation? This is life size. This is life size David Miscavige plush doll. You confirm 6 inches soft right here, you guys. Okay. I love it. Okay. Blue Noser Linda. You guys, like me, formed an opinion of Jason at the beginning, but I've revised my opinion, and many of you are just too rigid to realize he's completely different after talking with Aaron. I don't think I've made him completely different. I think his approach to this conversation is different because he thought we were going to be having a different kind of conversation.
I thought I was going to be talking with Chris again. Yeah. I thought I was talking with Chris again, where you're going to be like, you can't say anything about Scientology that's even remotely acceptable. It's a slave organization. And so I came with all these dot points, and now I'm like, actually, Aaron's not like that. So I was embarrassed.
All right. So Merrily says, so you don't actually believe in anything you're saying. You're just saying it because nobody else is.
When you take an academic position, you look at it through a particular lens, and you argue for it in a particular way. And one thing that perturbs me about some academics, I've run into a minority of them, is they think that what they're writing is capital T truth, but it's just an opinion. So I'm willing to take the Scientology perspective into my thesis, as well as the anti-Scientology perspective, and write it all down. As far as what I actually believe, unfortunately, it seems like due to my path, we touched on this earlier, it might be another 10 or 15 years before I can work that out. And yeah, maybe in 10 or 15 years after I've done my thesis, I'll be able to give you a direct answer of like what is my opinion. But right now, I don't have one. And it should be like that, because you're not supposed to write a thesis if you already have the opinion set. Like, that's not a thesis. Like, you're supposed to ask a question and explore the question. Yeah.
That must be hard, though. As a Scientologist, you do have an opinion, or a former member, you do have an opinion. Is it, I don't know, considered an academic muscle that you can flex to pretend that you don't? How does that work?
I would say best look at my Instagram reel for that, where I argue against myself. And
I'm not going to do that.
That's fine. But the point is, there are parts of me that I'm not sure about, and I'm fighting against myself, and it's a journey. I know I got the opinion that you don't like Jordan Peterson.
He's one of the people. Look, I enjoy listening to people. There are a lot of people I enjoy listening to because I like seeing how their process works, regardless of what I think about their conclusions. I know a lot of people don't like Jordan Peterson. He's a controversial figure. I thoroughly enjoy listening to him, regardless of. I enjoy listening to Sam Harris. Those guys aren't even on the same ends of the spectrum. Do you know what I mean?
Cool. So I'm like that too. Like, I enjoy listening to some of his stuff. It doesn't mean I agree with everything. But one thing that he was also a gateway drug for coming out of the church, because he does say some things that are kind of similar to Scientology, actually, about responsibility and so on, but probably not as extreme as.
I've never seen a religious guy spend so much time trying to pretend to be non-religious.
Right. Yeah. Peterson. Yeah. So he talks. One thing I do like, I actually like his earlier work. I find him very hard to watch now, but his earlier stuff I thought was cool. And his early stuff on the book he actually wrote before he became famous was Maps of Meaning, or Maps to Meaning. And it's about how, like, it's kind of like a Jungian perspective about how.
I got to tell you, you're going to lose me if we talk about this much longer.
Okay. So he communicates ideas that have been around since forever, like about personal achievement and so on. And one of the ideas was, you find that thing that is most meaningful to you, and it could be a very difficult path. It's the hero's journey. And I've looked at the whole Scientology thing, and it's like, yeah, this is difficult for me to do it this way. It doesn't necessarily help my recovery, if you will, and whatnot. But I feel, regardless of whether all of your audience feel, I feel it's a very important thing to do. I'm very passionate about it, so I'm going to do it. And hopefully when I get to the end, I'll feel some sort of sense of achievement, but maybe I won't. Who knows? Maybe I'll get to the end and be like, fucking hell, it's been 20 years and I've just wasted another 20 years on Scientology. That's the irony of what I'm doing, right? I'm still researching Scientology.
I hope you get to the end of all of it and you go, I should have just started a YouTube channel. Damn.
Exactly, right? Exactly. No, I'm not.
I think, honestly, whether you feel like you have enough time on it or not, I think you should just fire up a channel anyway. You can just go live and talk about what you're doing. I mean, it would be interesting. We'll talk off camera. We'll talk off camera.
We'll talk about it. Yeah, yeah.
All right. So I'm not being
fair gamed in any way, shape, or form. No.
Okay. Relative time works. What would be the Christian equivalent to independent Scientologist? Do you think the golden rule is nice, but you're an atheist?
Well, golden rule.
Two-parter.
So the golden rule isn't just a Christian idea. That's come out perennially, pretty much in every great society. It's not an exclusively Christian idea, but the Christian. So with Christians, one thing that I think about Christians is it's perfectly acceptable to say, oh, I had a Christian upbringing. I don't really go to church, but, I'm kind of cool with that. And,
but isn't the answer here simply Protestantism? Would be like the original offshoot from, no, I got it all wrong. Let's just give the simple answer to what you think the Christian equivalent would be. An independent Scientologist is just someone who practices Scientology outside of the mother church, and it's considered that it basically makes you practically an apostate.
I mean, what you were saying about Protestantism in the 1500s is probably the correct answer to the question. I guess I was answering an inverse question of how I get perturbed that it's perfectly acceptable to say to someone, I grew up in a Christian background, but I don't really practice it. And people go, okay. But if you just say to someone like me, like, one thing I can say about myself is I have a Scientology background. And then sometimes I feel harangued about, what are you now? What's your exact position? It's like, can't I just say like those Christians, like, I had Scientology parents. I spent some time in there. It didn't work out. And now I'm like, whatever on it. Like, why can't that also be acceptable? Do I have to take a position?
I think that's totally acceptable. Who do you feel like, not who like names, but where do you get the most pushback on being able to say something like that? From what quarters?
The
Twitter sphere?
The Twitter sphere, Chris for one. And honestly, I've had some run-ins with people at uni,
Okay.
Like I said to one professor of Eastern philosophy, like, someone mentioned you do Buddhism and I wanted to do a thesis on Scientology when I'm done. And maybe they said you might be interested in that. And she turned around to me and said, oh, I don't believe in crystals and that sort of stuff. And Scientology's hurt people. So no. And she said this in front of other philosophy professors. This is when I first started uni. And I was really embarrassed.
Wow.
And that hurt. And that is perhaps my imagination, but I feel like I've had a lot of those conversations or just picking up from people's comments, not necessarily on here, but just in general, where it's like, what's your exact stance on Scientology? It's like, well, I don't know. I grew up in it and I'm just living my life.
Interesting. All right, Prince Muskie. Does Tom Cruise get in trouble for not following LRH rules guides in making films? Surely he doesn't do it the way LRH taught.
That's golden.
I love it. Prince, I think they give Tom Cruise a pass on not following the Golden Era Productions advices on lighting and all that kind of shit. Okay. Cornelius has asked this question so many times, I'm finally going to bring it up. Jason, did you hear the Hubbard lectures for Class 5 or Class 4 auditors about hypnotism?
Not specifically. I have heard him talk about hypnotism in the basics lectures.
Yes.
I get the feeling there's a more to that question, though. There's another second question that is the person sort of asking me, do I not accept that Hubbard was practicing hypnotism or something like that? Or can you tell me, Aaron? What do you know? What did he say in those lectures?
That's the thing. Anytime Hubbard ever mentioned hypnotism in his lectures, he mentioned the fact that he had studied hypnotism. Yeah. He mentioned the fact in Dianetics, in fact, the Dianetics process, particularly book one, the procedure given in the book Dianetics, not later New Era Dianetics, he refers to the Dianetic reverie, a sort of light hypnosis, but not deep enough to do harm, whatever. Even in Dianetics, he sort of does warn the auditor against, improper use of Dianetics procedures could lay in hypnotic suggestions. I believe I remember lectures where Hubbard did brag about being able to hypnotize people. But, I get a little defensive when people mention things like this. And if I thought about it a little more deeply, I might, there might be reasons I get defensive that I'm not presently very aware of. I feel like I will see people who've never been in Scientology take certain quotes out of context like it's a gotcha. And it always pisses me off because it's like there's so much real shit to talk about. And I'll give you an example. There's a lecture where L. Ron Hubbard says the way to control people is to lie to them. And they go, oh my God, Hubbard said the way to control people is to lie to them. I'm like, yeah. And he said it to a room full of auditors that were being trained. This wasn't like, he was like, the way to control people is to lie to them. And that's why we undo the lies and the auditing. It's like, you did not catch L. Ron Hubbard secretly admitting to lying to all of the Scientologists so he can control them. Now, did L. Ron Hubbard lie to all the Scientologists that he can't control them? Yes, he did.
But separately.
But this lecture, this statement that he made in the lecture, it's not like, you caught him. You caught him. It was a hidden recording. It's like, no, it was every Scientologist has listened to that damn lecture. Anyway, I get a little defensive on these things, but whatever. Certain people will tell you that I'm still a brainwashed cult member, and some people like Chris Shelton and some of his academic friends. Okay, so just
does he have academic friends?
If you want to call them that, I'm not going to name any names. We can discuss it off camera. Yeah. To correct AKA TCP UDP, does the Aftermath Foundation need volunteers in Germany to help dropouts? We will accept volunteers from every country on Earth. So just correct AKA TCP. There are a handful of Scientology orgs in Germany. So we absolutely are always interested in having as many volunteers as possible any place where there's orgs. So if you go to the website, theaftermathfoundation.org, there should at this point be an actual form that you can fill out and submit. That's awesome. And thank you for your support there. Let's see. Stacy says, I think you are a very deep thinker and dig into conversation. Great. But isn't Scientology abuse horrors just facts without all the dissertation and defense? I'm not sure I totally follow this, but what do you make of it?
Stacy's still thinking I'm defending. Describing isn't defending. I'm not going to be defending or promoting. I'm just describing. It's not a defense. As far as the Scientology horror abuses go, yeah, and that's why I could never defend the Church of Scientology. Period.
Okay. All right. Miss Kim, again, I wanted to be like Aaron and be open-minded, and I see all I see is a lifetime academic, someone that lives in his head and his books and not in the real world. Ouch. Go ahead.
So the texts are what generates the culture. You are right, because to some degree I'm dodging the horrors, right, in my work. But like people have done studies on Hitler's rise to power and some of the great things he did for the German economy before the war. I'm not imagining that I'm going to be doing a thesis and it's going to be the thesis on Scientology that everyone has to bow down to. I'm just going to be another voice in the academic discourse on it. And I would expect other academics to criticize it, critique it, and then do their own work on it.
I think I've just seized upon what is actually something I would fundamentally object to what you're doing.
Sure.
If what you're saying is you are only going to examine the precise written word on the page, that's not what Scientology.
That's right.
is.
Yeah, that's fine. To some degree, I'm not even doing a thesis on Scientology then, right? I'm doing it on the textual analysis of the written work of Scientology. Yeah, totally fine. Yep. I don't want to overreach like this guy and say, I'm speaking for all Scientologists. That's not what I'm going to be doing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Lori Plays says, plunged into the religion and politics. Oh, plunged into the religion. Politics next. Point taken, Lori. Point taken. Okay. This is Jeffrey Augustine from the Scientology Money Project channel. In my opinion, Jeffrey is actually a religious scholar. So
is he?
Well, I call him that.
I know he's a big figure.
I see him as a religious, not Scientology. Jeff did not grow up in Scientology. He grew up in some form of Christianity.
Cool. Hi, Jeff. I think it's cool that you're watching.
Jeff has deep historical religious knowledge. Okay. And actually, are you familiar with him on my channel, Jeffrey Augustine?
I haven't watched him specifically on your channel, but I've actually listened to some of his podcasts. I know who he is. I'm like, cool. He's listening. Great.
Okay. Good. In my opinion, Scientology is solipsism. Is this supposed to be
solipsism? Is when you basically can only know yourself. It's like
oh shit! I never heard of that word before.
Yeah,
I grew up in a cult, guys. I'm sorry. In my opinion, Scientology is solipsism erected upon Hubbard's illogical framework. The Thetan is an irreducible entity who ultimately mocks up their own reality. That's a complete. That last sentence there is completely accurate representation of Scientology.
So he's talking my language here, and what he's saying is an interesting take on it. And at this point, I don't have a critique. He probably knows more about it than me.
Okay.
I would just point out that every religion has an illogical framework, but but it's interesting. Even your Declaration of Independence has a logical framework, by the way. So if we
now you cross the line and you know it.
Yeah, because you're American, right? but no, it's just a point because with some people like, oh, well, all religion has like, yeah, but also constitutions have illogics in them, and like it's a thing. We're human, But the sort of thing that Jeffrey Augustine's talking about here, that's the sort of thing that I would be investigating. And yes, the Thetan is an irreducible entity who ultimately mocks up their own reality. And I could write pages and pages on that. That's fantastic.
All right. SPTV Tattoo Warrior. The answer is in my tattoo. That's a real tattoo she got.
Wow. That's
I have
dedication.
video. I have video of her getting that tattoo.
Where is that? Is that on her arm?
I think it's on her leg.
The leg, okay.
If I recall correctly.
The photo's really small here. I can't quite see.
Oh, I only know from the video. Otherwise, I probably would
right.
Okay, Linda in Drissy. Hey, Ron, it's 11 a.m. here in Perth. Aren't you tired? No, I am a night owl. I am never asleep. I am never asleep before 2 a.m. I promise you that. This has been a lot of fun, I got to tell you. Okay, Andrew Humphrey. Will Scientology use anything you write in your paper that they can use to promote Scientology? They may take things out of context. Interesting question.
Probably. I don't know how to dodge that question, and that's something I need to.
So, but here's what's interesting is there are, and this is actually where academics who do these cute little studies of Scientology have gotten a really bad name, is because a lot of them are actually paid by Scientology to do it.
Yeah. I think the fact that I'm declared is going to be a bit different, right? They won't be paying me to do a study. But
that, so say you, good sir.
Right, fair enough. It might come down to a prologue, like an introduction to the thesis, a single page note that just says, like, I'm writing this on the text of L. Ron Hubbard's philosophical religious materials. And, but it, I really need to point out that I've had these experiences and other people have had these experiences, and this organization at the moment is behaving very dangerously. And, that is a really good question, and it's something that weighs on me. And
do you feel that if your paper is something Scientology could use to promote itself, that there is something wrong with your paper?
Ultimately, no, because then that's a deep question. Because thought experiment. What if my paper reveals that actually Hubbard has sufficiently signposted and flagged the dangers of using it, and it sort of points the finger at the Church of Scientology. It's like, but these guys are just whack.
Well, if my grandmother had wheels instead of legs, she would be a bicycle.
Okay.
So the thing is, if that's how your paper turned out, your paper would be wrong.
Right. Okay. Well, I don't know how it'll turn out. It might turn out the other way. I could do the analysis and be like, this stuff is fucking horrendously dangerous and no one should go anywhere near it. Like, I don't know. Like, I have an open mind, which was what I was originally declared with before I got declared, having an open mind. So yeah, I don't know how my paper is going to come out. It's like, but surely you can see from my perspective as a burgeoning academic or someone who's going to start walking in the space, I have to go into it like that. I have to go into it open-eyed and be like, let's see what the text says. If that's my study. If I was doing a sociological study, it's different. Then I can bring in.
But don't you know what the text says, or am I missing your point?
Well, in learning what I've learned at uni, I now read the text very differently already. And by the time I get to doing the thesis, I'll read it differently again still, because he says stuff and I'm like, oh, I know what he's talking about here. Like I know what he's referring to. Like, one thing I'll say about my time in Scientology was, and maybe this does sort of acknowledge partly with your like Plato thing, is like I would never particularly had too much interest in finding out too much about the other stuff. I'll just be like, oh, that's what Plato is, so I can get back to Scientology. But now I have as much interest in other systems of thought. So if he brings up Plato, then I can go, actually, he's wrong about what he says here about Plato. Or I can be like, yeah, he's made a good point. And that's a different perspective.
I'm glad you mentioned the Plato thing again, because the thing is, L. Ron Hubbard in his works and his lectures and everything did constantly mention other source references, but you would be mistaken if you thought he ever suggested that the people he was talking to should also go and read those. He never did that.
I don't know. That's where
I do know. I mean, it's not in some level, it's just not good enough to say I don't know. Like, people do know. It's not unknowable. Like,
in the culture, yes.
No,
The
not in
text,
the
I'm not
culture.
sure.
In the lectures. Never did he ever say, this is where I got this information from, and you should read it too.
Oh, right. Like, he never makes that direct. Yeah.
He never said, here's my list of recommended readings so you guys can have as broad of a, depth of knowledge as me. He wanted to be the sole source of knowledge, but claim that his knowledge was bolstered by thousands of years of thinking men. And yet people, for example, he makes a lot of references to Buddhist beliefs. I've had Buddhists tell me almost everything he says about Buddhism is incorrect. A Scientologist would never know that because he doesn't recommend that Scientologists go study about Buddhism. In fact, if you did, you would get in trouble for being other practicing.
So, given what you know about that stuff, then could you imagine that someone who, I wouldn't call myself the critical thinker at large, but I've done critical thinking. Unlike Chris, I've actually taken the unit and got a high distinction in it. Like actually who's done work and been put through academic rigor, who is so used to having ideas pushed back. That's every time I get a paper marked from my supervisors or professors. That's so they're critiquing how I'm writing and how I'm thinking. So surely you would, in your mind, can you not see that? Imagine that by the time I get to the thesis, I'm going to have a very critical eye, and I'm not going to be coming about it from the point of sycophancy or like trying to win anyone over.
Look, I want to make it clear. I do fully appreciate the point of, if you're going to truly embark on what is supposed to be an unbiased academic study. Well, that's actually why I was asking. I don't even know how it's possible to do that on something you already have personal knowledge and experience with. Clearly it's a challenge. Feel free to tackle the challenge. I don't want any of this to be construed as me criticizing
no, it's fine.
your effort. I
have an answer for you, so I'm going to jump in, Aaron. So, if you allow, when I first was at university, the first thing I wanted to do was prove that Hubbard was a Scientologist, and my thesis was all going to be about proving how Hubbard's Scientologist, a philosopher. I was going to prove that Hubbard's a philosopher in a thesis, and then I started running into ideas, and I got shitty with the church, and they got shitty with me. And then the next thing I wanted to do in my thesis was show how bad Scientology was. That was my second thesis idea. And I was going to show how bad Scientology was by philosophical analysis. In learning the different things I've learned at uni, I've come to a point where I understand that that's not how you do a thesis. And a thesis is just looking at something through a particular method, through a particular lens. So whatever the method is, or the lens, will direct the direction of the thesis. But I have no interest in either of my first two thesis ideas. I'm not trying to prove that Hubbard's a philosopher or that Scientology is bad.
I hope everyone collectively watching just breathed a sigh of relief, because that actually, what you just explained, I think answered a hell of a lot of questions. First, you started out from a positive bent. Then you were like, screw that, I'm going from a negative bent. And then you were like, wait, both of those approaches is wrong. And that's sort of explains everything we've heard in this interview, I think. And I think you actually answered this next question, actually. What is the point? It seems to me on some level, your point is just to do an academic exercise on the subject of Scientology and to try to do it right.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'm not claiming that I'm not going to be holding it up saying, hey, you guys need to read my book. And if you don't, you're not talking about Scientology. You're talking about Scientology probably more than I will be, because I'll be doing it from a very particular constrained lens. Yeah.
Okay. And even though I guess it's a rhetorical question at this point, and also this is sort of, predetermining what is the right outcome, which is against the scientific process. I still do feel as biased or whatever as this sounds. If your paper ends up being something Scientology can use to promote itself, I feel there is something wrong with your paper.
Well, you're not doing an academic thesis, are you? And you're entitled to that.
Now you're crossing the line and you know it.
But you know what I mean? Like, I know
what you mean. I'm trying to reconcile these two things in my brain. but it's almost like you mentioned some people will do some studies of, the rise of the Third Reich and contributing factors, and somewhere in those studies you will hear some positive influences, economically speaking, of the Third Reich and whatever. And I guess no one would ever confuse I had a really good analogy going there.
Well, I got it. Who's going to then say, "Oh, we should bring the Third Reich back because Hitler did some great things in the early days"? Like, that's not what's going to happen, right?
Right.
Is that what you're going to say?
Well, sort of like that of nobody would go. Correct me if I'm mistake this. Someone might do academic studies about parts of how the Third Reich came to power and whatnot, but I don't think an academic is going to sit down and go, "Now, has anybody ever examined with a unbiased eye whether the Third Reich?" I don't even know what analogy I want to use here, because analogies get people in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like having a background of Scientology, knowing Scientology, and then approaching it going, "Gee, I just don't know how this study is going to turn out," seems so disingenuous. I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around it.
Okay, well, let me give you a bit of history with me. When the basics, so I was about 20, and I'd pretty much at that time decided that like Scientology wasn't giving me what I wanted in life. And I was actually almost thinking of not walking away entirely, because my dad was still alive and he was very into it. And I don't think I would have been allowed to do that almost, like it just wouldn't have worked. But I came to a point where I was disenchanted with it. And then the basics came out, and I bought a set of the books and studied them at home on my own. And I didn't talk to anyone about it, didn't listen to anyone, and I didn't do the extension courses. I was just like, no, I started with the original thesis. They're like, "Oh, you got to start with dynamics." I'm like, no, I'm just going to start day dot and work my way through. I didn't worry about any word clearing tech or anything. I was just like, I'm just going to read these books like a normal human being because it's not working for me. And then I finished those, and then I was so excited with it that I joined the SEAL again, which was a real big mistake. But Scientology became for me that early, you talk about 50s, 60s, that's when the basics mainly is, in the early 50s actually. And so when I think of Scientology, that's kind of what I see it as. And I've always sort of laughed at events and people standing up and clapping and ideologue fundraising with the fucking costumes. And I've just never been into that. I was never part of that. I've always been a little bit of a academic in my head, reading books, and I've always been happy with that. So yeah, that's why it's like.
So based on your experience reading the basics, I guess we might say uninfluenced by the cultural pressures of the organization and David Miscavige,
At the time.
Are you someone who is pro L. Ron Hubbard, but less pro David Miscavige and Church of Scientology?
I don't have any opinion on David Miscavige because I just don't care. But I mean, if I had to answer your question,
you can't have no opinion.
If I had to answer your question, yes, that would be something you could say about me, but I would never phrase it like that. Probably the more pertinent question is, what do I think about L. Ron Hubbard? And I think of him like I call him Hubbard. I don't call him LRH or anything else. And the reason I call him Hubbard is just the same as I refer to Nietzsche or Plato. I just refer to him. I think of him as a philosophical figure.
Well, you can call me Sally, but do you think L. Ron Hubbard and his philosophy is a positive force for good in the world? I mean, this is probably what people are trying to get at. They're like, we don't understand what's happening.
As a whole, no. And I think that as the years went on, he drank his own Kool-Aid and started to tighten it up into draconian terribleness. But the early stuff, the philosophy of it, not saying the psychology as in the therapy of it, but the philosophy of it, I think of it just like I would think of Nietzsche or Plato, who, Plato, his ideal society was like ruled by communist aristocracy, and they had shared wives, for example.
I don't know about any of that shit. I grew up in a cult.
But you know what? But you get the analogy or the metaphor, or what I'm saying here is other philosophers like Wittgenstein Wittgenstein hit a child over the head so hard that the child apparently died and he fled the town. He's a famous philosopher. Schopenhauer's philosophy is that we all stop procreating so that mankind ceases to exist. You know, it's like, it's not like other philosophers who are considered mainstream philosophers are all great guys. You might have even seen that meme that goes around that's like, is there a reason why philosophers all look like serial killers? And they put up a few pictures of philosophers. Like, there's something to that. Like, philosophy, when I say if I think of Hubbard as a philosopher, don't get confused and think that means I think he's a great guy. I just think he's a philosopher.
That's fine. All right, Jack Stevens. And then we'll wrap it up after this one, okay? So if you're going into your thesis with an open mind after studying the tech, you decide, oh my gosh, he's right, then you're going back to, so if you're going into your thesis with an open mind after studying the tech, you decide, oh my gosh, he's right, then you're going back to Scientology. I think I'm reading that right.
No, that's good. I'm glad we're ending on this, because this is something I was speaking with my wife and some other people who I won't mention because they're still in Scientology.
I bet she's nervous.
Yeah, right. Because she's like, no fucking way we're going back. And I said to her, I said this exact thought experiment. I was like, what's going to happen if I do the thesis? Like, obviously, if I do the thesis and it's all terrible and I'm like, nah, this is shit, I wouldn't go back. But what would happen if I did the thesis and this happened? And I'm like, oh my God, actually, there's enough here. I don't know, because I can't see the future.
Jace, how can you pretend that you don't know what you already know?
No. I'm saying I don't know what I would do if.
No, but I mean, it seems like there's actually, you're actually keeping things open for the possibility that I might get to the end of this research project and decide that Scientology is in fact good. How can you pretend that you don't know what you know, and your knowledge can only come from something that's going to happen in the future?
Because to me, Scientology isn't the Church of Scientology and the cultural experience. To me, Scientology is the written word and the lectures. So if I was to do an analysis on the written word and lectures and go, actually, there's something to this, then I have to then grapple with, but can I deal with that group? And I'd have to say my answer, I'm leaning towards a strong no, towards official Church of Scientology. But then the question becomes, do I become an independent Scientologist? I don't know. I feel that what happened last time in session, I don't ever want to go in session again. So even if I was to become a philosophical Scientologist after the thesis, I don't ever envision. The reason I'm unsure is because who knows what the fucking. If you would ask me 5 years ago, would I be here now? No. Just it wouldn't have even been possible to even consider it. So who knows what's going to happen in 5-10 years time? I don't know.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, safe to say that you're on a path. It's your own path. It's your path to travel. You have every right to travel that path. I'd be, I'm definitely interested to see how this goes for you. I'm interested in continuing to talk to you about it as you travel the path, and maybe sometime let's chat about your actual Scientology story. We didn't even touch on it.
I don't know if I want to do it again, but
okay, fine, we won't. No,
yeah,
but if you're interested, by the way, this might be the longest interview I've ever done.
That happened to Chris as well.
No, this honestly, this has flown by. I cannot believe it's been 3 hours and 15 minutes. It feels like we've been chatting for 20 minutes.
No, I'll just recommend if people want to know my story, they can watch Chris's podcast. He was very gentle with me in terms of me going through it, but I just don't want to go back there again. It's like I want to move on from it, and they fucked me, and we'll move on, and I'm okay. I'm doing good.
Fascinating shit. How old are you? Tell me again. 38, 37?
36. I'm turning 37 in a week's time.
You don't look a day over 35. You look great.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. How old are you, Aaron?
42.
Okay, there you go. So a little bit.
Yes, an old man over here. Jason, this has been a lot of fun. I mean, I appreciate you not getting defensive at people poking fun at you. I know my audience has no patience for people who sound like they're apologizing for Scientology. I understand that's not your position. That's not where you're trying to come from. Hey, not everybody's going to call David Miscavige the world's shortest cult leader, you guys. Come on now. He'd be cute if he wasn't such a destructive cult leader. We do like to have fun here on this channel and take it a bit lighthearted. And actually, I tease David Miscavige. I do get a lot of shit when I make fun of David Miscavige for being short. I go, guys, I'm not making fun of short people. I'm making fun of David Miscavige because it bothers him so much. And I understand not everybody loves it. Jason, I've really enjoyed this. I would do this again.
Great.
Yeah.
I'd love to. I just might be. I'm in my last semester, and I've got some serious units finally to tackle. So next 12 weeks. I should be reading one of these assigned books that they just throw at you like, oh, just read this by end of semester in addition to everything else. So I'm supposed to be doing that right now. So I don't know how much time I really should justify to do this until I finish. But if not before then, I would love to do more conversations afterwards.
All right, good. The door is always open, my friend. Call me anytime.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for watching. Thanks to everyone who watched until the very end. And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click